Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we dive into today's bear attack stories, I'd like to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe and leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. We'll bring stories from areas near you. Now let's get into the first case. The morning sun sparkled on Lake Tahoe's crystal waters as I adjusted my life vest, double-checking the straps with practiced hands. September in the Sierra Nevada was a gamble. You could get summer-like days or an early winter chill. Today, the weather had blessed me with perfect conditions. Clear skies, light breeze, and temperatures promising to climb into the mid-70s. You sure you don't want company, Jason? Mark, the rental shop owner, called from the dock. He was organizing a rack of paddles, his weathered face creased with the permanent tan of someone who'd spent decades on the water. Nah, I need this solo time, I replied, securing my phone in its waterproof case. Been a rough month at work. Just want to clear my head. You know? Mark nodded, but his expression remained concerned. Bears have been active lately. Fish and wildlife spotted 3 different ones near the shore this week. Maybe stick closer to the marina? I laughed, clicking the case to my vest. Bears don't swim out this far, Mark. I've been kayaking here for years. They swim better than you think, he muttered, but I was already pushing off from the dock. The familiar motion of paddling settled into my muscles as I glided away from the marina. Early morning meant I had the lake almost to myself. Just a few fishing boats in the distance and the occasional call of an osprey overhead. My yellow kayak cut clean lines through water so clear I could see 30 feet down, where submerged boulders loomed like sleeping giants. I pulled out my phone to snap photos of the shoreline, capturing the way sunlight played on the granite cliffs. The lake's surface was like polished glass, broken only by the gentle ripples of my paddle strokes. Peace settled over me like a warm blanket. This was why I came here, to remember what silence felt like. The snap of a branch drew my attention to the shoreline. Through my camera's screen, I noticed what looked like a dark log floating near the tree line, maybe 50 yards from where I drifted. I zoomed in, trying to get a better look. The log moved. My finger froze on the camera button as the shape resolved itself into something that made my stomach drop. Muscular shoulders, black fur gleaming wet in the sunlight. A head that rose from the water, jaws slightly parted. No way, I whispered, the words barely a breath. No fucking way. The bear's head swiveled toward me, as if my whisper had carried across the water. Our eyes met through the camera lens, and in that moment, I knew with bone-deep certainty that I was no longer an observer of nature. I was being observed. I lowered my phone with trembling hands, hoping somehow I'd imagined it. But there it was, a full-grown black bear, and it was staring directly at me. Hey! I called out, my voice cracking. Every wilderness safety course I'd taken said to make noise, to let bears know you were human. Hey bear, go on. Get out of here. The bear's response was to lower its head and begin swimming. Toward me, my arms felt like lead as I watched those powerful strokes push through the water. Each movement was smooth, purposeful. This wasn't a bear that had accidentally found itself in deep water. This was a predator in its element. Mark! I screamed toward the marina, but I drifted far enough that the boats near the dock were just tiny specks. Somebody! Help! Only the mountains answered, my voice echoing back to mock me. I fumbled with my paddle, nearly dropping my phone into the lake as I tried to turn the kayak around. The rental shop's safety briefing played through my head. Stay calm, control your breathing, focus on smooth strokes. But all I could focus on was the rhythmic splashing growing louder behind me. Please, I whispered, to God or the lake or whoever might be listening. Please. Another splash, closer now. I didn't dare look back. The morning sun still sparkled on the water. The mountains still rose majestically around the lake. And somewhere on shore, people were starting their day, completely unaware that I was living a nightmare. My shoulder muscles burned as I dug the paddle deeper, trying to find more speed. The kayak responded sluggishly, as if the water had turned to syrup. Each stroke felt slower than the last. The next splash was close enough to spray water onto my neck. This isn't happening, I gasped, paddling harder. This can't be happening. But it was happening. With each passing second, the sound of powerful strokes and heavy breathing grew closer. The bear's breath cut through the morning air, not labored or tired, but steady and strong. This was a creature built for this kind of pursuit, and I was nothing but slow, awkward prey. I felt the first hint of movement in the water beneath my kayak, a displacement, a shift in the current. Time seemed to slow down as I realized what it meant. The bear was under me now, swimming beneath my boat. My paddle froze mid-stroke. In the sudden silence, I could hear water dripping from the blade, each drop hitting the lake's surface with crystalline clarity. The mountains watched impassively. The sun continued to sparkle. And somewhere beneath me, a nightmare was about to break the surface. 200 yards of open water stretched between me and the nearest shore. I knew this because I'd made this trip dozens of times, always noting the distances as a safety precaution. Now those carefully memorized measurements became a countdown to disaster. Come on! Come on! I muttered through clenched teeth, each paddle stroke sending jolts of pain through my already burning shoulders. The shore seemed to mock me, neither growing closer nor further away, as if I was trapped in some horrific loop. The splashing behind me had developed a rhythm. 3 powerful strokes, a pause for breath, then 3 more. Each series brought the bear closer, and my mind tortured me with quick calculations. At my fastest, I could maybe make 4 miles per hour in the kayak. A black bear could swim at 7. A child's voice carried across the water from somewhere ahead. "Daddy, look at the big dog swimming." My head snapped up. Through the morning haze, I could make out a family on the distant beach. The father was pointing toward me, no, behind me. "Get inside," I screamed, my voice cracking. "Call the rangers." The wind carried away my words, leaving only enough volume for them to wave cheerfully back. They thought they were watching a heartwarming scene. A man and his dog enjoying a morning paddle. In reality, they were about to witness something else entirely. Splash, splash, splash. 3 more strokes closer. My phone was still clipped to my vest. If I could just reach it, call for help, but taking even one hand off the paddle now would slow me down. The bear would catch me for sure. "Please," I gasped, though I wasn't sure who I was begging. "Please, I don't want to die like this." Splash, splash, splash. A fishing boat appeared around the shoreline bend, moving parallel to us. Hope surged through my chest. "Hey!" I screamed, waving one arm frantically. "Help! Bear!" The boat continued its lazy path, the occupants focused on their lines. My waving must have looked like a friendly morning greeting. Splash, splash, splash. That last one was closer, much closer. Water sprayed across my back, cold droplets that might have been from my paddle, might have been from the bear's powerful strokes. I didn't dare turn to look. "Think?" I panted, trying to remember everything I'd ever read about bear encounters. Make noise, look big, fight back if attacked. But all that advice was for land. No one ever told me what to do when a bear chases your kayak across a lake. Splash. A wave rocked my kayak as the bear's paw cut through the water inches from my hull. The near miss sent spray into my face, momentarily blinding me. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear my vision while keeping the kayak straight. Time became measured in heartbeats and splashes. Every muscle screamed for rest, but animal instinct kept my arms moving. The shore ahead still seemed impossibly far. Another splash, this one hitting my paddle. The resistance nearly tore it from my grip. "No, no, no," I chanted, knuckles white on the paddle shaft. Without it, I was dead for sure. The family on the beach had stopped waving. Even at this distance, I could see their postures had changed. They finally realized what they were watching. Splash. This time, the bear's paw clipped the back of my kayak. The impact jerked me sideways, and for one terrifying moment, I thought I would capsize. Somehow, I maintained balance, but the price was speed. The momentary disruption cost me precious yards. That's when I heard it. The sound that will haunt my nightmares forever. Not a growl, not a roar, but the deep, heavy breathing of a powerful predator nearly close enough to touch. Each exhale sent warm puffs of air against my neck. The bear was no longer behind me. It was beside me. I could see it now in my peripheral vision. 900 pounds of muscle and fur cutting through the water like it was born to it. Its eyes weren't crazed or angry. They were focused, calculating. This wasn't personal. I was just prey that had caught its attention. Help! I tried to scream, but it came out as a whisper. Somebody help me. The bear's head turned slightly, those dark eyes meeting mine. In that moment, I saw something that shook me more than the chase itself. Intelligence. This wasn't just instinct driving it. The bear was problem-solving, figuring out the best angle of attack. As if confirming my thoughts, it adjusted its course slightly, positioning itself for what was coming next. My arms moved automatically now, beyond pain, beyond exhaustion. The lake's surface had become my whole world. Just water, paddle, and the massive shape pacing me through the crystal-clear depths. That's when I made my final mistake. I looked toward shore again, desperately seeking help. In that split second of distraction, the bear made its move. The impact came from the right, powerful enough to lift my kayak partially out of the water. Time slowed to a crawl as I watched droplets hang suspended in the air around me, catching the morning sunlight like diamonds. Then the teeth came. Time slowed to a crystalline moment as the kayak tilted sharply right. 900 pounds of determined predator pressed against the yellow hull, water cascading off black fur in sheets. The morning sun caught each droplet, creating a beautiful halo effect around the nightmare that was unfolding. No! The word caught in my throat as hot breath hit my neck. The bear's head rose beside me like a sea monster from ancient legends, water streaming from its fur. This close, I could see every detail I never wanted to know. The wet shine of its nose, the droplets clinging to its whiskers, the individual teeth designed by nature for tearing flesh. My world narrowed to the sound of its breathing, deep, steady huffs that spoke of exertion but not exhaustion. The bear wasn't tired from the chase. It was just getting started. A low rumble vibrated through the air between us. Not quite a growl, but something older, more primal, the sound a predator makes when victory is certain. Help! I managed to scream, finding my voice at last. Somebody! The rest of my cry transformed into a howl of pain as teeth pierced my life vest and found my left shoulder. The pressure was enormous, like being caught in an industrial vice. I felt the exact moment when the bear's teeth broke skin, then muscle, then scraped against bone. People say extreme pain brings clarity. They're wrong. Pain, this intense, fragments reality. My world dissolved into strobe-like flashes. Flash. The lake's surface, suddenly vertical as the bear yanked me sideways. Flash. My paddle, somehow still gripped in my right hand, useless against the massive force pulling me out of the kayak. Flash. The sound of the life vest's material tearing, mixed with a wet crunch that I distantly realized was coming from my own body. Let go, I gasped, the words bubbling out with a copper taste. Please let go. The bear's response was to shake its head, treating my body like a dog's chew toy. Each movement sent fresh waves of agony through my shoulder. I felt things inside me tear and snap that were never meant to be torn or snapped. Then we were falling. The bear's weight and my desperate thrashing finally capsized the kayak. The world turned upside down as we crashed into the lake together, the bear's teeth still locked onto my shoulder. Lake Tahoe's famous clear water turned pink around us as we submerged. Strangely beautiful, I thought, watching my own blood create abstract patterns in the blue-green depths. The cold shocked my system, adding a new layer of pain to the symphony of agony from my shoulder. Underwater, sound became muffled, but I could feel the bear's growl vibrate through my entire body. Its grip tightened as we sank deeper, and primitive terror seized me. This was how it would end, pulled down into the depths by a monster I never should have encountered. My lungs began to burn. The bear's fur waved in the water like dark seaweed, its eyes still fixed on me with that terrible intelligence. Spots danced at the edges of my vision as precious air bubbles escaped from my nose and mouth. Pure survival instinct took over. My right hand still gripped the paddle, I couldn't feel it, but somehow my fingers had maintained their death grip. With every ounce of strength remaining, I swung it backward and up. The carbon fiber blade connected with something solid. The bear's grip loosened fractionally, not from pain, probably just surprise. But it was enough. Another hit, this one catching what felt like the side of its head, and suddenly the pressure on my shoulder released. I exploded upward, my body demanding air. The surface seemed miles away, a bright shimmer that kept receding no matter how hard I kicked. My shoulder felt like it was being stabbed with heated pokers, each movement sending fresh jolts of agony through my chest. When I finally broke the surface, the sound that came out of me wasn't human. Part scream, part sob, part animal terror. It echoed across the lake's surface, bouncing back from the distant mountains as if they were mocking my pain. Through water-blurred vision, I saw the bare surface a few feet away. Time seemed to stop as our eyes met again. Blood, my blood, stained its muzzle, dripping into the water. Its expression hadn't changed. No rage, no hatred, just that same predatory focus that had driven it to chase me halfway across the lake. My overturned kayak floated between us like a yellow barrier. The bear's head turned slightly, watching me with one dark eye as it treaded water. I could see it calculating, deciding if I was still worth the effort. "Please," I whispered, though I'm not sure if any sound actually came out. My left arm hung useless in the water, sending out little ripples of red with each wave that rocked us. I could see people gathering on the distant shore now, tiny figures pointing and gesturing. Their shouts carried faintly across the water, but they were too far to help. This moment, or this decision about whether I lived or died, was between me and the bear. It lunged forward suddenly, and my heart nearly stopped. But instead of coming at me again, it turned away with powerful strokes, heading back toward shore. I watched in disbelief as the massive form cut through the water, moving with the same fluid grace it had shown during the chase. No hesitation, no looking back, like I had ceased to exist for it the moment it decided I wasn't worth the continued effort. Blood pulsed from my shoulder with each racing heartbeat, creating small blooms of red in the crystal-clear water around me. I was alive, but as I looked at the distance to shore, I realized the nightmare wasn't over yet. The bear might have decided to let me live, but Lake Tahoe might still decide to let me die. The water around me bloomed red with each heartbeat, spreading out in hypnotic patterns before dissipating into Lake Tahoe's crystal depths. My shoulder felt like it was made of molten metal, sending waves of agony through my entire body with each tiny movement. "Stay conscious," I gasped, trying to focus on my immediate survival needs. The waters of Lake Tahoe, famous for their clarity, were also known for their killing cold. Even in September, prolonged exposure could be fatal. My kayak bobbed upside down a few feet away, the yellow hull now scratched and gouged from the bear's attack. The paddle somehow remained clutched in my good hand, my fingers frozen around it in a death grip. The sound of a distant outboard motor caught my attention. Through blurred vision, I could see a boat heading in my direction. Hope surged, then immediately died as the boat turned, following a course that would miss me by several hundred yards. "Hey!" I tried to shout, but what came out was barely above a whisper. My voice seemed to have been left somewhere underwater, along with a good portion of my shoulder muscle. A wave of dizziness hit me, and I knew I was running out of time. Blood loss, cold water, and shock were a deadly combination. I had to get to the kayak. The first attempt to swim nearly caused me to black out. My left arm hung uselessly, and every movement sent fresh jolts of agony through my chest. Using just my right arm and legs, I doggy-paddled toward the overturned hull. "One stroke," I muttered through chattering teeth. "Just one stroke at a time." Another wave of dizziness washed over me. The mountains around Lake Tahoe seemed to spin, their peaks blending into the sky. I shook my head to clear it, immediately regretting the movement as pain lanced through my shoulder. "Stay awake," I commanded myself. "Eyes on the kayak. Just get to the kayak." After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, my hand touched the hull. The familiar texture of the plastic grounded me somewhat, giving me a focal point beyond the pain. Now came the hard part. I needed to get on top of the overturned kayak, but with only one working arm, it seemed impossible. The paddle, I could use it as a lever. I wedged the paddle across the hull, creating a makeshift handle. Taking a deep breath, I kicked hard with my legs while pulling with my good arm. The scream that tore from my throat echoed across the water. Despite my efforts to keep my injured shoulder still, the movement sent white-hot agony through my entire left side. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision. No, no, no! I gasped as consciousness started to slip away. Stay awake! Stay awake! I slapped the water with my good hand, using the shock of cold to jolt myself back to awareness. It worked barely. Through the haze of pain, I heard a voice carried across the water. There, in the water, someone's hurt. The outboard motor I'd heard earlier changed pitch, growing louder. Help was coming if I could just hold on. I tried again to pull myself onto the kayak, this time moving more slowly. The pain was still intense, but manageable if I took it centimeter by centimeter. Eventually, I managed to drag my upper body onto the hull. That's when I saw the bear. It had reached the shoreline about 200 yards away, its black fur glistening as it emerged from the water. I watched, transfixed, as it shook itself like a massive dog, sending spray in all directions. There was something almost casual about the gesture, as if attempting to kill me had been nothing more than a mild diversion from its morning routine. The boat's engine grew louder, snapping my attention back to my immediate situation. Looking down, I saw the water around the kayak was stained pink. My life vest, torn and punctured, was slowly turning red on the left side. Hey, hang on. A man's voice closer now. We're coming. My vision started tunnel again. The cold was really setting in now, making my teeth chatter so hard I worried they might break. I focused on the approaching boat, trying to use it as an anchor for my fading consciousness. The bear had disappeared into the tree line, leaving no evidence of our encounter except my injuries and the damaged kayak. Already, the whole thing felt surreal, like a nightmare I might wake up from at any moment. Just a little longer, I whispered to myself. Stay awake just a little longer. The boat was close enough now that I could hear fragments of conversation. Medical kit? Call the Rangers. Blood in the water. What happened to him? My grip on consciousness was slipping. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was the bear emerging briefly from the trees, looking back across the water. Our eyes met one final time, and in that moment, I understood something fundamental about nature that I'd forgotten living in our civilized world. Out here, there was no good or evil, no right or wrong. There was only survival. Then the darkness swept in and I let go. We've got you, a voice said from very far away. Just hold on, buddy. Hold on. The cold water released its grip on my legs as strong hands pulled me into the boat. The morning sun still sparkled on Lake Tahoe's surface. The mountains still rose majestically around us, and somewhere in those trees, a bear continued its mourning, carrying a small taste of my blood as the only proof of our encounter. My last conscious thought was a bizarre gratitude, not just for survival, but for a glimpse into a world most people never see. A world where bears swim out to attack kayaks, where teeth and claws meet carbon fiber and nylon, where the boundary between civilization and wilderness is revealed to be nothing but a comforting illusion. Then everything faded to black. Time stretched like cold honey as the bear's eyes met mine across the bloody water. Each detail burned into my memory with crystalline clarity. Water streaming from its black fur, muscles rippling beneath its coat. Those intelligent eyes calculating something I couldn't understand. "Don't move," whispered Dave, one of my rescuers, his hand gripping the boat's gunwale. Nobody fucking move. We were caught in a tableau, me, half dragged onto their fishing boat, blood spreading across the deck. 3 strangers who'd been enjoying a peaceful morning of fishing before they spotted me. And the bear, treading water less than 20 feet away, its breath coming in steady huffs that sent ripples across the lake's surface. "Should I start the engine?" murmured Tom, the boat's owner, his hand hovering near the key. "Wait," hissed Dave's teenage son, Michael. "Look!" The bear's head tilted slightly, nostrils flaring as it tested the air. Despite my fading consciousness, I recognized what the others didn't. It was making a decision. In that moment, suspended between pain and shock, I saw something remarkably human in its expression. Cost-benefit analysis. My blood had turned the water pink around us. The bear's muzzle was stained red. It could easily swim the short distance to the boat. And yet, the massive head swiveled toward shore, then back to us. One powerful stroke brought it closer, and I heard Michael's sharp intake of breath. "If it comes for the boat," Tom whispered, "we're gonna have a problem. We can't outrun it with this much weight." But the bear had made its choice. With a sudden surge of movement that made everyone flinch, it turned and began swimming toward shore. Each stroke was as powerful as when it had chased me, showing no sign of fatigue from our encounter. "Holy shit," breathed Michael. "Holy shit, did that just happen?" "Start the engine," Dave ordered, pressing a wadded shirt against my shoulder. "Start it now while it's leaving." The outboard motor coughed to life, but the bear didn't even turn to look. It maintained its course toward shore with single-minded determination, as if we had ceased to exist for it. "Hang in there, buddy," Dave said to me, his voice steadier now that the immediate danger was passing. "We've got a first aid kit and rangers are on their way. Just stay with us." I tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come. My entire focus had narrowed to the bear's retreating form. There was something magnificent about it. The way it cut through the water with such fluid grace, its fur gleaming in the morning sun. "I've never seen anything like it," Michael said, recording with his phone. "Dad, are you seeing this?" The bear reached the shallows, water cascading from its massive form as it rose onto all fours. It shook itself vigorously, sending spray in all directions, just like any dog after a swim. The casualness of the gesture was somehow more terrifying than the attack had been. Did it just? Tom struggled to find words. Did it just go for a morning swim and decide to attack a kayaker for fun? "Keep pressure here," Dave instructed his son, placing the boy's hands on my wound. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "Yes, we need immediate assistance on Lake Tahoe, about half a mile east of Emerald Bay. We have a male, 30s, severe bear attack injuries." "Yes," I said, "bear attack. On the lake." The bear had reached the tree line now. It turned for one final look across the water, and even at this distance, I felt the weight of its gaze. Then it simply vanished into the forest, leaving no evidence of its existence except my injuries and the bloody water slowly dissipating in its wake. "They don't believe me," Dave said, ending the call. "Said bears don't swim out to attack boats." "Well, this one fucking did," Tom replied, steering us toward the nearest marina. We all saw it, but already I could feel the event taking on a dreamlike quality. Without the immediate presence of the bear, it seemed impossible. A bear swimming hundreds of yards out into Lake Tahoe to attack a kayaker? Even I would have doubted it, if not for the hot pain pulsing through my shoulder and the bloody tracks its teeth had left in my flesh. "Got it all on video," Michael said, waving his phone. "Wait till everyone sees." "Shit!" He interrupted himself, staring at his screen. It didn't... Nothing recorded. Just shows a black screen. Must have had water on the lens or something. Of course, I thought distantly. There would be no proof. Just another lake legend. Another story for tourists to laugh about over their beers. "Keep talking to us," Dave urged as my eyes started to close. "Stay awake. Tell us what happened. From the beginning." I wanted to tell them everything about the perfect morning, the dark shape in the water, the terrible intelligence in those eyes. But shock and blood loss were taking their toll. The words wouldn't come. Instead, I watched the spot where the bear had disappeared. Now just another shadow among shadows in the tree line. Somewhere in those woods, it was going about its day, perhaps already forgetting our encounter. But I knew I would never forget. The boundary between our world and the wild had been breached and could never be fully repaired. "Almost there," Tom called from the helm. 5 minutes to the marina. Hang on." The morning sun still sparkled on Lake Tahoe's surface, just as it had when I'd started my paddle an eternity ago. Everything looked the same, but nothing would ever be the same again. I closed my eyes and let the hum of the engine carry me toward help, and away from those dark waters where legends swim. The emergency room's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Dr. Sarah Chen's face as she examined my shoulder. Her expression grew more puzzled with each gentle probe of the wound pattern. "You said this happened on the lake?" she asked for the third time, carefully cleaning another puncture mark. "While you were in a kayak?" "Yes," I whispered, my throat raw from answering the same questions over and over. The local anesthetic made my shoulder feel distant, disconnected, but I could still map every point where the bear's teeth had torn into me. "And you're certain it was a bear?" She made another note on her tablet. "Not a large dog, perhaps? We get a lot of accidents with off-leash dogs around the lake." I closed my eyes, seeing again that massive head rising from the water beside me. It was a bear, full-grown, black bear, probably 900 pounds. "Mr. Rivera," she said, using that careful tone doctors reserve for patients they think might be confused. "Black bears rarely exceed 500 pounds. And they almost never—" "I know what I saw," I interrupted, then immediately regretted my sharp tone.
I'm sorry.
I know how it sounds, but it happened. A knock at the door preceded the arrival of Ranger Mike Sullivan and Deputy Sarah Torres. Both wore the slightly skeptical expressions I was becoming familiar with. "How are you feeling, Mr. Rivera?" Ranger Sullivan asked, pulling out a notepad. "Mind if we ask you a few questions while the doctor works?" "Go ahead," I sighed. "But I've already told 3 other officers what happened. Just trying to get all the details straight," Deputy Torres said, her pen poised. "Walk us through it one more time. From the beginning." I recounted the story again, trying to stick to the facts. The early morning launch, the dark shape in the water, the chase, the attack. With each telling, it sounded more impossible to my own ears. "And you're certain about the size?" Ranger Sullivan asked, frowning at his notes. 900 pounds? I hesitated. "That's what it looked like to me." "Mr. Rivera," he said carefully, "the largest black bear ever recorded in the Lake Tahoe area was just under 500 pounds. And in 20 years of working these lakes, I've never heard of a bear swimming out to attack a boat." "Check the kayak," I said. "There must be teeth marks, DNA." "We did," Deputy Torres interjected. "There are some scratches, but nothing conclusive. Water tends to wash away evidence pretty quickly." Dr. Chun finished cleaning the last wound and stepped back, studying her work. "These puncture patterns are unusual. They're consistent with a large predator, but the spread and depth—" She shook her head. "I've treated dog bites, mountain lion attacks, even a bear mauling last year. This is different." "Could be a boat propeller," Ranger Sullivan suggested. "Maybe you capsized and drifted into—" "It wasn't a propeller." The words came out louder than I intended, making everyone in the room flinch. "I saw it. I felt its breath on my neck. Its teeth were in my shoulder. How can you not believe me when I'm sitting here with bite marks?" Uncomfortable silence filled the room. Dr. Chun busied herself preparing sutures while the officers exchanged glances. "We did find some bear tracks on the beach," Deputy Torres offered, "but with the weekend crowds, it's impossible to say when they were made." "What about the fishermen?" I asked. "The ones who rescued me? They saw it too." "We took their statements," Ranger Sullivan said, flipping through his notes. "They saw a dark shape in the water, yes, and they confirmed you were bleeding when they pulled you out. But in their own words, they were too focused on helping you to get a clear look at what might have caused the injuries. The boy, Michael, he was recording with his phone. Video didn't come out," Deputy Torres reminded me gently. "Just shows a black screen." Dr. Chun began suturing the wounds, each neat stitch closing a chapter of a story no one believed. The local news would probably run a small piece. They always did when something unusual happened on the lake. But without proof, without witnesses willing to corroborate the impossible. "We'll file a report," Ranger Sullivan said, closing his notepad. Put up some extra warning signs about wildlife in the area. Standard procedure. But you don't believe me, I said. It wasn't a question. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. What I believe doesn't matter, Mr. Rivera. What matters is you're alive, and we'll take appropriate precautions to keep everyone safe. Whether it was a bear, a boat accident, or something else. The important thing is you survived. I watched them leave, their boots squeaking on the hospital floor. Through the window, I could see the sun setting over Lake Tahoe, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere out there, a bear was going about its evening, carrying a small taste of my blood as the only proof of our encounter. Almost done, Dr. Chun murmured, tying off another suture. You'll need to keep these dry for at least 2 weeks.
No swimming, no kayaking.
I almost laughed at that last part. Don't worry, I won't be going near the lake for a while. She paused in her work, studying my face. You really did see something out there, didn't you? Yes, I said simply. I did. She nodded slowly, returning to her sutures. You know, there are a lot of things in nature we don't fully understand. Just because something hasn't been documented doesn't mean it can't happen. I appreciated her attempt at comfort, but we both knew the truth. Without evidence, my story would join the countless other tales that circulated around Lake Tahoe. Another legend for tourists to discuss over campfires. Another reason for locals to shake their heads and smile. But I had my proof, written in puncture marks and torn flesh. Every scar would be a reminder that sometimes the line between the world we think we know and the world that actually exists is as thin as the surface of a lake on a perfect morning. 3 weeks after the attack, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, carefully peeling back the bandages. The crescent of puncture wounds had begun to heal, forming a ring of pink scars across my left shoulder. Dr. Chun said I was lucky. The bear's teeth had somehow missed major arteries and nerves. A few inches different, and I wouldn't be standing here. My phone buzzed on the counter. Another message from Mark at the kayak rental. Doc's quiet without you, Jason. Water's perfect this weekend. Sure you don't want to get back out there? I'll comp your rental. I didn't respond. My yellow kayak sat in the garage, unwashed since the attack. Dark scratches marred its hull, not proof of a bear attack, according to the rangers, but I knew better. Every groove and scrape told the story that no one believed. The doorbell rang, making me jump. My hand automatically went to my shoulder, a new habit I'd developed. Dr. Marcus, my assigned trauma counselor, stood on the porch. Good morning, Jason, she said as I let her in. How are we doing today? Fine, I replied automatically. Shoulders healing well. She settled into what had become her usual spot on my living room couch. And the sleep. I looked away. The dark circles under my eyes answered for me. Still having the dreams? She asked, making a note in her pad. They're not dreams, I said, more sharply than I intended. They're memories. Tell me about last night's memory. I sank into the armchair, wincing as the movement pulled at my healing shoulder. Same as always. I'm on the lake. Water's perfect, clear enough to see straight to the bottom. Then I noticed this dark shape. And how does that make you feel? How do you think it makes me feel? I snapped. I wake up every night feeling teeth in my shoulder. I can't look at a swimming pool without checking for shadows under the surface. I drove past the lake yesterday and had to pull over because I couldn't breathe. That's a normal response to trauma, she said calmly. But Jason, we need to discuss the possibility that your mind might be embellishing certain aspects of the event. I stood up, pacing to the window. You mean you think I'm making it up? Not at all. I believe you experienced something traumatic on the lake. But our minds often process extreme stress in unusual ways. The bear you described, 900 pounds, swimming miles out into deep water to attack a kayak. It doesn't match documented behavior patterns. I know what I saw. Do you? She asked gently. You were alone, stressed, probably dehydrated. There are many things that could appear bear-like on water. A large dog, perhaps, or... Stop! I interrupted. Just stop. I've heard all this before. From the rangers, the doctors, my friends. No one believes me. She was quiet for a moment, watching me. What would help you move forward, Jason? What do you need? I need. I paused, realizing I didn't know how to finish that sentence. Proof? I had my scars. Validation? The bear was probably miles away, hunting salmon or raiding campgrounds. Understanding? How could anyone understand something they refused to believe? The session continued with more questions, more gentle suggestions about processing trauma and accepting uncertainty. But as Dr. Marcus packed up to leave, she hesitated at the door. Jason, she said carefully, there's a group that meets on Thursdays, other survivors of animal attacks. They might understand better than I can. Would you be interested? I almost laughed. So they can tell me I'm crazy too. So you can talk to people who know what it's like to have an encounter that changes how you see the world. She left a card on the side table. Think about it. After she left, I found myself in the garage, staring at the kayak. The scratches seemed to mock me, telling a story no one would ever believe. I ran my fingers along the gouges in the hull, remembering the moment when 900 pounds of predator had decided I was worth chasing across a lake. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert. Local kayaker claims bear attack on Lake Tahoe, authorities skeptical. The article was brief, treating my experience as just another summer oddity. They'd quoted Ranger Sullivan. While we take all wildlife reports seriously, there's no evidence to support claims of unusual bear activity on the lake. No evidence. Just my scars, my nightmares, and a scratched kayak. That night, I dreamed of the lake again. But this time was different. I was watching from shore as another kayaker paddled out into the perfect morning. A dark shape moved through the water behind them, powerful and purposeful. I tried to scream a warning, but no sound came out. I woke up drenched in sweat, my shoulder throbbing with phantom pain. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and typed out a message to Mark. About that kayak rental. Maybe next summer. Not ready yet. His reply came surprisingly quick. No rush, Jason. Lake's been here forever. It'll wait for you. I touched my shoulder, feeling the raised pattern of scars under my t-shirt. The lake would wait, yes. But somewhere in the forests around Lake Tahoe, a bear was going about its life, carrying the memory of our encounter in whatever way bears remember such things. And I knew, with a certainty that no amount of therapy could shake, that it would remember the taste of my blood just as clearly as I remembered the feel of its teeth. 3 months after the attack, I found myself standing at Emerald Bay at sunrise. The morning air was crisp with early winter's bite, steam rising from my coffee cup like phantom breath. Below, Lake Tahoe stretched out in perfect stillness, its surface a mirror reflecting the pink and gold sky. My shoulder ached in the cold, a constant reminder that had become as familiar as my own heartbeat. The scars had healed into a neat crescent, each puncture mark a period in a sentence written in scar tissue. Movement in the tree line caught my eye, and my heart rate doubled instantly. Just a deer, I told myself, even as I took 3 quick steps back toward my car. Beautiful morning, a voice said behind me, making me jump. An older man had approached silently, his own coffee cup teeming in the dawn light. His jacket had a Forest Service patch. Mind if I join you? I nodded, trying to slow my breathing. He settled against the viewing area's railing, his eyes scanning the shoreline with practiced ease. Name's Bill, he said, 43 years with the Forest Service. Retired now, but I still come up here most mornings. Jason, I replied, not offering my last name. After the local news story, I'd had enough of being that kayaker around town. Ah, he said quietly. Thought it might be you. When I tensed, he added, don't worry. I'm not here to tell you what you did or didn't see. Below us, something dark moved through the water near the shore. My coffee cup froze halfway to my mouth. Just a log, Bill said, but I noticed he was tracking it too. Probably. We stood in silence for a while, watching the sun climb higher. Finally, he spoke again. You know, back in '82, I saw something out on these waters that I've never told another soul about. Wouldn't believe me if I did. Despite myself, I turned to look at him. His weathered face remained focused on the lake. This job, you spend enough time in the wilderness, you learn something important, he continued. Nature doesn't care about our categories, our scientific classifications, our neat little boxes of what should and shouldn't be possible. A family of tourists walked past us, their children running ahead to the railing. They pointed excitedly at the lake, completely at ease. I envied their innocence. The thing is, Bill said, watching the children, most people come to places like this thinking they're visiting nature, but that's backward. Nature is visiting us, letting us play here, letting us pretend we understand its rules. My hand unconsciously went to my shoulder, feeling the raised ridges of scars through my jacket. Why are you telling me this? He finally turned to look at me, his eyes sharp despite his age. Because you've seen behind the curtain now. Had your own personal reminder that we're not at the top of the food chain, no matter what we tell ourselves. More movement in the tree line caught my attention. This time, my heart nearly stopped. A massive black shape moved between the trees, deliberate and powerful. Bill, I whispered, taking another step back. I see it, he said calmly, not moving from the railing. Beautiful animal. The bear emerged from the trees, its fur glossy in the morning light. It was huge, exactly as I remembered. Our presence didn't seem to concern it as it made its way down to the water's edge. That's the one, I managed to say, my mouth dry. From the attack. I'm sure of it. Bill nodded slowly. Probably is. Bears are creatures of habit. They patrol their territory, follow the same routes, visit the same hunting grounds. We should warn them, I said, watching the tourist family still taking pictures nearby. Get everyone away from the water. Look again, Bill said. The bear had reached the shore. Without hesitation, it waded into the shallows, then began swimming with powerful strokes. But instead of heading out into the lake, it moved parallel to the shore, focused and purposeful. It's hunting, Bill explained, following the morning fish movements. Perfectly natural behavior. Natural. I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. It attacked me, swam hundreds of yards out just to... Did it? Bill interrupted. Attack you specifically? Or were you simply in its path that morning? Wrong place, wrong time, wrong understanding of what belongs to who out here. The bear continued its patrol, eventually disappearing around a rocky point. The tourist family hadn't even noticed it, too busy taking selfies with the sunrise. The rangers said bears don't swim out to attack boats. I said, that it wasn't possible. Bill finished his coffee with a small smile. Rangers say a lot of things. Have to keep people feeling safe. But the wilderness, it keeps its own counsel. He pushed away from the railing, crumpling his empty cup. You'll be all right, Jason. Just remember you're not crazy. What happened to you was real, but it wasn't personal. You just got a glimpse behind the curtain, saw the world as it really is, not as we pretend it to be. That's a gift in its way. A dangerous gift, but a gift nonetheless. As he walked away, I stayed at the railing, watching the point where the bear had vanished. The morning sun sparkled on the water, just like it had that day. Below, shadows moved beneath the surface, fish, logs, or something else. Impossible to tell from this height. My shoulder ached with remembered pain, but for the first time since the attack, I felt something else too. Understanding. Not peace exactly, but acceptance. The bear hadn't been a monster. It had simply been itself, a creature of an older, wilder world that still existed beneath the thin veneer of our civilization. I took one last look at the lake, then turned back toward my car. I wouldn't be kayaking again anytime soon, but somehow that was okay. Some lessons about nature were worth the scars they left behind. The seasons turned like pages in a book, each one taking me further from that morning on the lake. Winter blanketed Lake Tahoe in white silence. Then spring melted the snow into rushing streams, and summer returned with its tourists and their cheerful ignorance. You hear about the kayaker who got attacked by a swimming bear last year? I overheard a teenage girl tell her friends at the Marina Cafe. My cousin's friend said it chased him halfway across the lake. No way, her friend replied, laughing. Bears don't swim out that far. It was probably a big fish or something. I kept my head down, focusing on my coffee. My shoulder had started aching the moment I'd arrived at the marina. A psychosomatic response. Dr. Marcus called it. I called it remembering. Actually, Mark said from behind the counter, glancing at me, that story's true. Guy was an experienced kayaker, regular customer. The teenagers turned to look at me, recognition slowly dawning on their faces. I touched my shoulder unconsciously, feeling the familiar ridges of scars through my shirt. For real, one of them asked. You're the bear guy? Before I could respond, the marina's radio crackled to life. Attention all boats. Be advised we have reports of a large black bear swimming near Emerald Bay. Please maintain safe distance and report any aggressive behavior. The cafe fell silent. Mark looked at me, his expression concerned. Different bear, he said quickly. Has to be. I stood up, leaving my coffee half finished, and walked out onto the dock. The morning sun sparkled on the water, just like it had that day. Through my polarized sunglasses, I could see deep into the crystal-clear water, where shadows moved with purpose beneath the surface. You don't have to stay, Mark said, following me out. No one would blame you for leaving. I'm not here for the lake, I replied. The rangers asked me to talk to their summer safety class. Share my experience. Mark nodded slowly. Think they finally believe you? No, I smiled without humor. But they figure my story might keep some tourists from doing anything stupid. Scared people are careful people. A group was gathering at the ranger station up the hill. I could see Ranger Sullivan setting up a projector, probably for his usual bear safety presentation. He called me last week, voice carefully neutral. We've had increased bear activity this season, he'd said. Thought your perspective might be valuable, even if we don't agree on all the details. Now, walking up to the station, I could hear him addressing the crowd. Black bears are generally shy creatures, preferring to avoid human contact. While they are excellent swimmers, they typically don't. He stopped as I entered, nodding in acknowledgement. The audience turned to look at me, and I saw the usual mix of curiosity and skepticism in their faces. This is Jason Rivera, Sullivan introduced me. He had an encounter with a black bear last year. He's here to share his experience and some safety tips. I took my place at the front, uncomfortably aware of all the eyes on me. A year ago, I would have tried to convince them, to make them understand the terror of that morning. Now I knew better. Before that day, I thought I understood bears. I'd taken the safety courses, watched the videos, read the pamphlets. I knew they were powerful, knew they could swim, knew they were smart. But knowing isn't the same as understanding. Through the window, I could see the lake stretching out below us. A tour boat cut through the water, leaving a white wake that quickly dissolved back into the blue. What I learned, I continued, is that we don't own these waters. We're visitors here in their territory. Every time you go out on that lake, you're entering a world that operates by older rules than ours. But bears don't attack boats, someone in the audience interrupted. Everyone knows that. I smiled, touching my shoulder. A year ago, I would have said the same thing. Now I know better. Nature doesn't read our rule books. It doesn't care what we think is possible or impossible. Did you ever see it again? A young boy asked from the front row. The bear. Maybe, I replied, thinking of that morning at Emerald Bay with Bill. But that's not the point. The point is that it's out there. They're all out there, living their lives according to rules we only think we understand. Ranger Sullivan cleared his throat, clearly ready to move on to more orthodox safety advice. But before he could speak, his radio crackled. Base, this is Patrol 2. Got another bear sighting in the water. Same area as last week. Over. The room fell silent. Through the window, I watched a dark shape cut through the distant water, powerful and purposeful. Same bear? Someone whispered. Different one, Sullivan said quickly. Has to be. But I knew better. Just like I knew that my scars would ache before storms, that I would never again see a dark shape in water without my heart racing, that somewhere in these mountains, a creature moved through its territory according to patterns we could never fully grasp. The important thing, I concluded, turning back to the audience, isn't whether you believe my story. The important thing is understanding that there are parts of this world we can't control, can't predict, can't explain away with our comfortable certainties. Outside, the shape disappeared beneath the surface, leaving only ripples that quickly smoothed back into the lake's perfect mirror. The tourists would soon return to their boats and beaches, confident in their safety briefings and wildlife pamphlets. But now and then, someone would look out across that beautiful water and remember the story of a kayaker and a swimming bear. They would scan the surface for shadows, feeling that ancient flutter of prey instinct in their chest. And maybe, just maybe, they would understand what I had learned at such cost. Some legends swim. The morning sun cast long shadows across the lakeside cafe's patio as I overheard a young couple at the next table, their voices carrying over the gentle lap of waves against the shore. Look at that, the woman said, pointing toward the water. I swear I just saw something huge swimming out there. Probably just a log, her companion replied. But he leaned forward, squinting across the sparkling surface. My hand moved automatically to my left shoulder, feeling the familiar topography of scars through my shirt. A year had passed since my encounter, but my body remembered, especially on clear mornings like this, when the lake looked as perfect as it had that day. Did you see the new warning signs they put up? The woman was scrolling through her phone now. Says to watch for bears near the water. Apparently, one attacked a kayaker out here last year. I kept my eyes on my coffee, stirring it slowly as I listened. That's just one of those local legends, her companion scoffed. Like Tahoe Tessie, bears don't swim out and attack boats. The familiar urge to turn around, to show them my scars and tell my story, rose in my throat. Instead, I took another sip of coffee, letting the conversation wash over me like the gentle waves below. Rangers are starting their morning patrol, called Mark from inside the cafe. He'd kept the rental shop running, though business had changed since my story started circulating. More safety briefings, stricter rules about solo kayaking. I watched the patrol boat cut across the bay, following what I now knew was a regular route. They'd added new protocols after my incident, not because they believed my story, exactly, but because enough similar reports had trickled in over the past year to make them cautious. Mr. Rivera? I turned to find a young ranger standing beside my table, notebook in hand. Amy Chun, according to her nameplate, must be new. I didn't recognize her. Sorry to interrupt your morning, she said, sliding into the empty chair across from me. But we had another sighting report yesterday. I was hoping to get your perspective. I smiled slightly. Ranger Sullivan still doesn't believe my story. Ranger Sullivan retired last month, she replied, opening her notebook. And I'm more interested in patterns than beliefs. 3 reports this summer of large black bears swimming far from shore. All in the early morning, all following similar routes. She pulled out her phone, showing me a map of the lake with red dots marking the sightings. My coffee went cold as I studied it, recognizing a pattern I'd seen before. They're following the fish, I said quietly. Early morning movements from feeding ground to feeding ground. Just like Bill said. Bill? She looked up sharply. Bill Morrison? The retired Forest Service veteran. I nodded. Met him up at Emerald Bay last year. He understood. Well, he understood that nature doesn't always follow our rules. She made a note, then hesitated. Would you be willing to come talk to my team? Not about the attack, we've all read those reports, but about what you've observed since then. The patterns, the behaviors. They won't believe me, I said automatically. Maybe not, she agreed, but they'll listen. Sometimes that's enough. A splash from the lake made us both turn. Something dark broke the surface briefly before disappearing into the depths. The couple at the next table fell silent, all pretense of skepticism forgotten as they watched the ripples spread. Different bear, Amy said quietly. Has to be. Does it matter? I asked. Different bear, same bear. They're all part of something bigger than our incident reports and safety protocols, aren't they? She studied me for a moment, then closed her notebook. You've changed your perspective since your initial reports. I stopped trying to make people believe me, I explained, watching the ripples fade back into the lake's mirror surface. Started trying to understand instead. And what have you understood? I thought about Bill's words from that morning at Emerald Bay, about nature letting us play in its domain, about the thin veneer of control we pretend to have over the wilderness. That we're not as separate from all this as we like to think, I said finally. Every person who rents a kayak, every tourist who takes a swim, every ranger who runs a patrol, we're all just visitors here. The lake, the bears, the mountains. They were here long before us, operating by rules we're only beginning to grasp. Amy nodded slowly, then stood to leave. The ranger station does a morning briefing at 7. If you're willing to share your observations, I'll think about it, I promised. After she left, I walked down to the water's edge. The couple from the cafe had moved on, replaced by the day's first wave of tourists preparing for their adventures on the lake. They moved with the confident ease of people who had never had their certainties challenged by tooth and claw. A family was renting kayaks from Mark's shop. I watched him give his safety briefing, noting how he'd modified it since my incident. And remember, he was saying, stay aware of your surroundings. The lake isn't just our playground. It's home to all kinds of creatures, some of which we might not fully understand. The father laughed. Like the famous swimming bear. Mark's eyes met mine briefly across the dock. Something like that. I touched my shoulder one last time, feeling the stories written in scar tissue beneath my shirt. Let them laugh, let them doubt. The lake kept its own counsel, and somewhere in these waters, its creatures continued their ancient patterns, indifferent to our beliefs or disbeliefs. A final splash drew my attention back to the water. Far out, where the morning sun turned the surface to diamonds, something dark and powerful cut through the waves. Different bear, same bear. In the end, it didn't matter. What mattered was the reminder it represented. That nature's stories didn't need our belief to be true, and its legends didn't need our permission to swim. The dashboard thermometer flickered between 41 and 42 degrees as I guided my Ford Explorer down the winding road towards Savage River Campground. September in Denali was already showing its teeth, bare trees clawed at a steel-gray sky, and patches of early snow dotted the shadowed hollows between rocks. The time on my dash read 6:47 p.m. Sunset wasn't far off. I hadn't seen another vehicle for the past 40 minutes. This late in the season, most tourists had cleared out, leaving the vast Alaskan wilderness to hardier souls, or perhaps just foolish ones like myself. The ranger's words from the visitor center still echoed in my head. "Mr. Allen," she'd said, adjusting her flat-brimmed hat as she reviewed my permit application. "You're planning to camp alone?" Her tone carried that careful neutrality I'd heard from park rangers before, masking concern behind professionalism. "That's right," I'd replied, trying to project confidence. "I've done plenty of solo camping in Yellowstone and Glacier." She'd nodded slowly, then turned her computer monitor toward me. "We've had increased grizzly activity in the Savage River area this week. They're in hyperphagia now, preparing for hibernation. This was taken by one of our trail cams yesterday. The image showed a massive grizzly bear, his shoulder height easily reaching the top of a park signpost. His fur was a dark cinnamon color, tinged with silver around the shoulders. Even through the grainy photo, I could see the massive muscle structure that separated grizzlies from their black bear cousins. "I appreciate the warning," I'd said, "but I've got bear spray and I know the protocols. Food in bear canisters, stored at least 200 feet from camp. No scented items in the tent." "Your call, Mr. Allen." She'd stamped my permit with perhaps a bit more force than necessary. "Just make sure you register at the trailhead box. If we need to come looking, we'll know where to start." Now, as I pulled into the empty parking area, those words felt less like standard procedure and more like prophecy. The gravel crunched under my tires, the sound unnaturally loud in the settling quiet. I killed the engine, and the silence rushed in like a physical presence. The registration box stood at the trailhead, its dark wood weathered by countless Alaskan seasons. As I approached, my boots crunching on the gravel, something made me stop short. There, running diagonally across the box's front, were 3 deep gouges in the wood. Fresh ones. The exposed wood was still light-colored, unweathered. "Jesus," I whispered, running my fingers along the marks. They were wide enough to fit 3 of my fingers side by side. My hand shook slightly as I took out the registration form and pen. Name Mark Allen. Destination Savage River Backcountry Zone 3. Planned return September 25th. Emergency contact Sarah Allen, sister, 50355500177. I tried to keep my handwriting steady, but the claw marks kept drawing my eyes back. How recently had the bear been here? Hours? Minutes? The setting sun had begun to paint Denali's distant peaks in deep crimson, the kind of red that reminded me of fresh meat. I needed to make camp before dark. Shouldering my pack, I clicked on my headlamp and started down the trail, its beam catching the metallic gleam of the warning sign. You are entering grizzly country. Travel in groups. Make noise. Carry spray. The path wound through stands of black spruce and patches of late-blooming fireweed, their pink petals nearly ghostly in the fading light. I followed proper protocol, calling out every few minutes, "Hey bear, coming through." My voice sounded small against the vastness of the landscape. Each call seemed to emphasize just how alone I was out here. Then I saw it, a print in a patch of mud just off the trail. My headlamp beam locked onto it like a spotlight, and I felt my throat go dry. The track was massive, fresh enough that water was still seeping into the deepest parts. The clear impression showed 5 toes and a pad wider than my outstretched hand. Claws the length of my fingers had left clear marks ahead of each toe. "It's fine," I muttered to myself, measuring the print with my hand hovering above it. They have huge territories, probably miles away by now. But even as I said it, I noticed how the surrounding grass was still bent in the direction of travel. The bear that left this print couldn't be more than an hour ahead of me. Maybe less. I straightened up, thumbing the safety strap off my bear spray. The crimson light had faded to deep purple, and the first stars were appearing above the jagged peaks. The temperature on my watch read 39 degrees Fahrenheit now. I needed to make camp. "Hey bear," I called again, my voice cracking slightly. "Coming through." Something rustled in the brush about 50 yards ahead. Probably just the wind, I told myself. But as I played my headlamp beam across the vegetation, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the gathering darkness, a pair of eyes was watching my light move across the landscape, waiting to see where I would stop for the night. I forced myself to keep walking. After all, I'd come here for solitude, hadn't I? Looking at the massive paw print one last time, I couldn't help but wonder if I was about to get more solitude than I'd bargained for. The wind picked up, carrying with it the wild sense of approaching winter, and something else. Something musky and primal that made my neck hairs rise. I picked up my pace, trying to convince myself that the shadows moving in my peripheral vision were just tricks of the fading light. They had to be, right? My headlamp cut through the deepening darkness, the beam catching pairs of reflective eyes in the underbrush. They flickered like dying matches here, then gone, then here again. I tried identifying them by size and height. Too low for a bear, probably snowshoe hares or voles. Still, each new pair made my heart jump. Just find a good spot and set up, I muttered to myself, scanning the terrain. The ideal site would be flat, away from game trails and with good visibility. The beam of my light caught a small clearing about 30 yards ahead, bordered by spruce trees. Perfect. As I moved toward it, the wind shifted, bringing that same musky scent I'd caught earlier stronger now. Wild, primitive, not quite rot, not quite earth, but something in between. Bear. Had to be. My hand instinctively went to the bear spray on my hip. "Hey bear," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just looking for a campsite. Something large moved in the darkness beyond my light's reach. A branch snapped, followed by the soft sound of heavy feet on pine needles. I swept my beam toward the noise, but whatever made it had already moved on. The clearing looked better up close. No obvious signs of animal activity, good drainage, and the required 200 feet from any water source. I shrugged off my pack, wincing at the way it thumped against the ground. Every sound felt too loud. "Okay, Mark," I said aloud, forcing myself to focus on procedure. Timer check. My watch read 7:52 p.m. Light was almost gone. Temperature down to 37 degrees Fahrenheit. I had maybe 20 minutes of useful twilight left. The tent went up first, a four-season North Face I'd used for years. Usually, the familiar routine was calming, but tonight my fingers fumbled with the poles. Each metallic click seemed to echo through the trees. When a deer barked in the distance, I dropped a stake. Shit! The word came out as a harsh whisper. I forced myself to take 3 deep breaths, remembering the mindfulness exercises from my wilderness first aid course. You're fine. Everything's fine. With the tent secured, I turned to the most crucial task: food storage. Everything scented had to go into the bear canister, not just food, but toothpaste, deodorant, even chapstick. As I sorted through my gear, my phone buzzed. 1 bar of service, barely enough for texts. Sarah, made it to camp okay? Me at Savage River. Setting up now. Sarah, stay safe, big bro. Those bears mean business. Me, thanks for the reminder, unamused face. I slipped the phone into my pocket, grabbed the bear canister, and swept my light around the clearing's edge. Park regulations required food storage at least 200 feet from camp. I needed a spot downwind, away from my tent. The beam caught something that made me freeze. Another print, this one pressed into a patch of moss. Fresh. The edges hadn't started to spring back yet. I played my light along the ground, following the direction of travel. More prints led into a dense stand of brush about 50 yards away. My mouth went dry. "Hey, bear," I called again, hearing the tremor in my voice. Coming through to store food. I picked a spot for the canister on the opposite side of the clearing from the tracks, trying to move quickly but quietly. The wind was picking up, making the spruce boughs creak and sway. Each moving shadow looked like a bear rising to its hind legs. Back at the tent, I double-checked everything. Bear spray within arm's reach by my sleeping bag. Emergency satellite beacon in the mesh pocket. Knife on my belt. The nylon walls suddenly seemed absurdly thin protection against 800 pounds of hungry grizzly. Christ, stop psyching yourself out, I growled, but I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching me. The darkness between the trees felt alive, breathing, waiting. I changed quickly into my sleeping clothes, stuffing the day's worn items into a dry bag. Even dirty clothes could attract bears. Another fun fact from the ranger station. Inside my sleeping bag, I checked my watch again. 8:47 p.m. The temperature had dropped to 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Snap. The sound came from the direction of my food canister. I sat bolt upright, fumbling for my headlamp. The beam showed nothing but gently swaying branches. Another snap, closer this time, followed by the distinct sound of something large moving through brush. "Hey, bear!" My voice cracked. "Hey, bear!" Silence answered, broken only by the wind. I lay back down, heart hammering. The rational part of my brain said to stay calm. Black bears and grizzlies rarely attacked people in tents. But the primitive part, the part that knew what it meant to be prey, kept remembering that massive print by the registration box. Every sound became magnified. Branches creaking, wind moaning, small animals rustling. With each new noise, I swept my light around, hands shaking. The bears would be actively feeding now, putting on weight for winter. Hyperphagia, the ranger had called it. The desperate drive to consume enough calories for hibernation. Exhaustion eventually began to win out over fear. My blinks grew longer, the spaces between them darker. The last thing I remembered before sleep took me was a sound. Something heavy moving through the underbrush, drawing closer in the autumn night. In my last conscious moment, I tightened my grip on the bear spray and thought of the ranger's words. If we need to come looking, we'll know where to start. I just hoped they wouldn't need to. The digital display on my watch read 3:17 a.m. when the first touch came. Something heavy brushed against the tent's north wall, making the nylon bow inward with a soft whisper. My eyes snapped open in the darkness, body instantly rigid. Please be a branch. Please be a branch. Please be. The sound that followed shattered any illusion of safety. Deep, rhythmic snuffling, like a dog tracking a scent, but much larger, much closer. Each inhale made the tent wall tremble. My hand crept toward the bear spray, moving with agonizing slowness. The nylon rustled slightly, and the snuffling stopped. Complete silence fell, more terrifying than any sound. I knew, with cold certainty, that the bear was listening, just as I was listening. The full moon cast a pale glow through the tent fabric, transforming the wall into a macabre shadow theater. First came the silhouette of a massive head, easily twice the size of a large dog's. Then the distinctive shoulder hump that marked this as a grizzly, not a black bear. As the creature rose to its full height, its shadow stretched up the tent wall, 8 feet if it was an inch. "Hey, bear!" I tried to call out, but it came as barely a whisper, my throat constricted with fear. I tried again, marginally louder. "Hey, bear!" The shadow moved, and a deep woof answered me, not quite a growl, but a sound of definite interest. The kind of sound a predator makes when it's found something worth investigating. My fingers finally closed around the bear spray's textured grip. The safety clip seemed impossibly loud as I eased it off with my thumb. 6 seconds of spray, effective range 25 to 30 feet. Not that distance mattered now. The bear was barely 3 feet away, separated only by a layer of nylon that suddenly seemed as insubstantial as tissue paper. The creature's claws caught on the rainfly as it moved, producing a sound like Velcro being slowly pulled apart. Each snag made my muscles tense, waiting for the moment when curiosity would turn to aggression, when investigation would become attack. "Mark!" My own whispered voice surprised me. "Mark, you've got to do something. Now." But what? The ranger's instructions tumbled through my mind. If attacked in your tent, fight back. Unlike black bears, grizzlies didn't tend to prey on humans. Most attacks were defensive. But this felt different, more methodical. The bear wasn't startled or defending cubs. It was hunting. A new sound joined the snuffling, the slow slide of claws against nylon, testing the fabric's resistance. The shadow shifted again as the bear moved toward the tent's entrance, toward the vestibule where I'd carelessly stashed my boots. The boots. Oh God, they probably still smell like the trail mix I spilled this afternoon. My free hand fumbled for the phone in my sleeping bag. 1 bar. Not enough for a call, but maybe. The screen's sudden light drew an immediate reaction. The shadow lunged forward, and the bear's nose pressed against the mesh panel near my face. Hot breath fogged through the netting, carrying the rank smell of carrion and wild things. I could see its face clearly now, broad and dish-shaped, with amber eyes that reflected the phone's glow like burning coals. Those eyes. I'd never seen anything so utterly alien, so completely beyond human understanding or appeal. They held no malice, but also no mercy. They were simply hungry. My thumb hovered over the emergency dial button, even knowing it was useless. The nearest ranger station was miles away. By the time help arrived, the bear's breath came in heavy pants now, each exhale hot against my face. A low rumble started in its chest, not quite a growl but heading there. The mesh panel bulged inward as the creature pressed harder, testing, searching for weakness. Time seemed to stretch like cold honey. I lay perfectly still, bear spray aimed at where I thought the animal's face would be when it broke through. The rangers had said most bear encounters lasted only a few minutes, but this felt like hours. My watch beeped softly, 3:30 a.m. The sound made the bear pull back slightly, and in that moment of slight reprieve, I heard another sound that turned my blood to ice. The slow, deliberate parting of nylon threads as claws began to work their way through the tent fabric. The shadow on my tent wall grew larger as the grizzly rose up again, paws now planted on either side of where I lay. At full height, it blotted out the moonlight completely. In the new darkness, I heard a sound like someone slowly tearing a bed sheet. This is it, I thought with strange clarity. This is how it happens. The tear widened with excruciating slowness. Cool night air leaked in, mixing with the bear's hot breath. Any second now, the fabric would give way completely. Any second now, I would have to fight for my life against one of nature's most perfect predators. My finger tightened on the bear spray trigger. 6 seconds of spray. Make them count. From somewhere in the darkness outside came a new sound, the sharp crack of a breaking branch, followed by what might have been another animal moving through the brush. The bear's head snapped toward the noise, its breath catching in a low huff. Please, I mouthed silently to whatever gods watched over fool campers in the Alaskan wilderness. Please. The grizzly's massive shadow hesitated, head turning between me and the source of the sound. Then, with terrible deliberation, it lowered its nose back to the growing tear in my tent, and began to pull. The tent collapsed in a rush of claws and muscle. One moment I was staring at the bear's shadow. The next, I was buried under a chaos of shredding nylon and crushing weight. The grizzly's massive paw swept through where my head had been a split second before, as some primal instinct made me roll left. Time fractured into strobing snapshots of horror. The tent pole snapping like a gunshot. Moonlight flooding in through shredded fabric. The overwhelming stench of wet fur and decay. A roar filled the confined space, so deep it seemed to vibrate in my bones. I kicked frantically at my sleeping bag, trying to free my legs. The bear's head tracked the movement, jaws opening to reveal teeth designed by evolution to shear through flesh and crush bone.
No.
I screamed, but the word became a shriek of agony as those teeth clamped down on my left shoulder. White-hot pain exploded through my body, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I felt things inside me tear, felt bones grind against each other in ways they were never meant to. The grizzly lifted me like I weighed nothing, shaking its head in the same way a terrier shakes a rat. The world became a blur of stars and shadows, pain and terror. Something warm and wet spread across my chest. Blood. I realized distantly. My blood. Help! The cry burst from me, though I knew no one was within miles. Someone help! My flailing hand struck something solid, my backpack, somehow tangled in the remains of the tent. The bear bit down harder, and I felt something in my shoulder give way with a sickening pop. The pain was beyond screaming now, beyond thought. But underneath the pain, a single clear thought surfaced. The bear spray. Where's the bear spray? I'd had it in my hand when the attack began. It had to be here somewhere, in this chaos of torn fabric and scattered gear. The grizzly shook me again, and in that violent motion, I saw it. The red canister, lying just beyond my reach. The bear released its grip on my shoulder, but only to adjust its hold. In that fraction of a second, I lunged for the spray. My fingers closed around it just as the bear's teeth sank into my backpack, inches from my spine. Training kicked in through the fog of pain and terror. Aim for the face. Remove the safety. Spray in AZ pattern. I twisted around, fighting through the agony in my shredded shoulder, and pressed the trigger. The spray hissed out in a cloud of burning orange, catching the bear full in the face. The effect was instant and violent. The grizzly reared back with a roar that seemed to shake the earth, releasing my backpack. Its massive paws swung wildly at its face, trying to wipe away the burning capsaicin. One blow caught me in the ribs, sending me sprawling. I scrambled backward on my good arm, every movement sending fresh waves of agony through my shoulder. Blood poured from the puncture wounds, hot against my skin in the cold night air. The bear staggered around the destroyed campsite, snorting and pawing at its face, its roars becoming increasingly desperate. "Get up!" I gasped to myself. "Get up, get up, get up!" But my legs wouldn't cooperate. The world kept tilting sideways, darkness creeping in at the edges of my vision. Blood loss, the rational part of my brain noted. Not good. The bear's thrashing had taken it several yards away, but it could recover any second. Already its movements were becoming more coordinate. Less panicked. It would be angry when it could see again. And I had no more spray. Forcing myself to my feet sent a wave of nausea through me so strong I nearly blacked out. My left arm hung useless, every heartbeat sending fresh pulses of blood down my chest and back. The wounds felt deep, muscle deep, maybe bone deep. Move! I commanded myself. Move! The grizzly's head snapped toward my voice, and even through its obvious distress, I could see the rage in its posture. This was no longer about hunger or curiosity. Now it was personal. I staggered backward, trying to put distance between us while keeping my eyes on the bear. My foot caught on something, the remains of my sleeping bag, and I went down hard. The impact drove what little air remained from my lungs. The bear charged. 800 pounds of muscle and fury covered the distance between us in seconds. I curled into a ball, making myself as small as possible, hands clasped behind my neck in the position the rangers had taught us. Playing dead was the recommended strategy for grizzly attacks, they'd said. But they hadn't said how hard it would be to play dead when every instinct screamed at you to run. The bear's hot breath washed over me, carrying the metallic scent of my own blood. I could hear it circling, huffing in that peculiar way bears do when they're agitated. Each step brought another wave of its musky odor, now mixed with the acrid smell of bear spray. Something warm dripped onto my back. Bear saliva or my own blood, I couldn't tell. I kept my eyes squeezed shut, trying to control my ragged breathing. Every second felt like an hour. Every heartbeat seemed to pump more of my life onto the cold ground. Please, I thought, please just let it be over. The bear huffed again, closer now. I felt its nose press against my side, sniffing. One swipe of those claws, one more bite from those massive jaws, and it would be over in a very different way. I held my breath, waiting for the killing blow, and waited, and waited. Blood poured from my shredded shoulder, each heartbeat pumping fresh warmth down my chest and back. The night air, which had seemed merely cool before, now cut like ice against my wet skin. Behind me, the bear's heavy breathing and frustrated huffs told me it was still following, though the spray had temporarily blinded it. Move, I whispered to myself, though my legs felt disconnected from my body. Move, move, move. My boots slipped on pine needles as I stumbled through the darkness. The moon cast just enough light to see shapes. Shadows are not nearly enough to navigate safely. But safety was relative now. Every step away from the bear was a step toward survival, even if I couldn't see where I was going. A branch snapped somewhere behind me, closer now. The bear's movements were becoming more coordinated as the spray's effects began to wear off. They'd told us in bear safety training that spray typically gave you 3 to 5 minutes. How long had it been? Time had lost all meaning. My foot caught on an exposed root, sending me sprawling face first into the forest floor. The impact drove what little air remained from my lungs. Stars burst across my vision, or maybe that was just the blood loss. I tried to push myself up with my good arm, but my muscles had turned to water. Get up, I gasped. Get! The words died in my throat as I heard it. The unmistakable sound of heavy paws on pine needles, drawing closer, much closer. The bear's breathing had changed from pained huffs to deep, rhythmic inhales. It was scenting me, tracking the trail of blood I'd left. Play dead. The ranger's voice echoed in my head. With grizzlies, playing dead can save your life, unless it's a predatory attack. Was this predatory? The tent, the methodical way it had torn in. No time to analyze. The bear's shadow loomed over me as I curled into a tight ball, clasping my hands behind my neck to protect my spine. The position sent waves of agony through my mangled shoulder, but that was the least of my concerns now. The bear's breath washed over me, hot and rank with the smell of decay. Each exhale ruffled my hair. I could hear it circling, taking deep huffing breaths, or a behavior I recognized from countless nature documentaries, though none had mentioned how it felt to be on the receiving end. Don't move, don't move, don't move. Something warm dripped onto my back. Saliva? My own blood? I kept my eyes squeezed shut, trying to control my ragged breathing. Every survival instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew that would be fatal. The bear would chase by reflex, and this time I had no spray to save me. Minutes stretched like hours. The bear continued to circle, sometimes so close I could feel the heat radiating from its massive body, other times moving away only to return. Each time it approached, I tensed for the killing bite. My shoulder throbbed in time with my pulse, each beat seeming weaker than the last. How much blood had I lost? The ground beneath me felt wet, but in the darkness, I couldn't tell if it was blood or dew or just my terror-soaked imagination. A new sound cut through the night, a distant wolf howl, echoing off the mountains. The bear's movements stopped. Another howl, closer this time, was answered by several others. Pack on the hunt. The bear huffed, a sound of decision rather than aggression. I felt its presence withdraw, heard the heavy footfalls moving away through the underbrush. But I didn't dare move. Not yet. This could be a test. A predator's patience waiting for prey to reveal itself. More wolf howls, definitely closer now. They'd probably scented my blood too. I had to move, had to find shelter, but my body refused to cooperate. The combination of blood loss, adrenaline crash, and sheer terror had left me utterly spent. Please, I whispered to whatever gods watched over fool campers in the Alaskan wilderness. Please, silence answered. No bear huffs, no wolf howls, no sound except the wind in the spruce trees and my own labored breathing. Still, I waited, counting heartbeats, until I reached 300. Finally, slowly, I uncurled from my protective ball. Pain screamed through my shoulder, but I managed to sit up. My headlamp had been lost in the initial attack, but the moon provided enough light to see that I was alone in a small clearing. Blood had soaked the entire left side of my shirt, looking black in the moonlight. The car, I thought. Get to the car. Keys still in pocket. 2 miles back to the parking lot. You can make it. You have to make it. Standing sent a wave of dizziness through me so strong I nearly blacked out. I stumbled against a tree, its rough bark grounding me in reality. Using the trunk for support, I oriented myself based on the moon's position. The parking lot would be southeast. Almost afraid to look, I glanced behind me. A trail of dark droplets marked my path through the clearing. The bear could easily follow that track if it returned. But the sounds of scattered wildlife, small animals resuming their nocturnal activities, suggested the predator had truly moved on. One step, I muttered. Just one step at a time. The first step was the hardest. The second wasn't much better. But the third came, and the fourth, each one taking me closer to safety and further from the nightmare behind me. Blood continued to seep down my arm, but slower now. Clotting, maybe, or maybe I just had less to lose. Somewhere in the darkness, a massive grizzly lumbered through its ancient territory, neither malevolent nor merciful, simply following the imperatives of its nature. And somewhere ahead lay warmth and light and help, if I could just keep walking. One step at a time. Dawn painted the Alaskan sky in pale watercolors as I huddled in my Explorer's front seat, shivering uncontrollably. The dashboard clock read 6:43 a.m. My shredded thermal shirt, now dark with dried blood, was pressed against my shoulder. Each heartbeat sent fresh trickles of warmth down my chest, but slower now. Whether that was good or bad, I couldn't tell. The ranger station's windows remained dark. My bloody handprint from 10 minutes ago stood stark against the glass door, the edges already starting to congeal. The morning air bit at my exposed skin, 34 degrees Fahrenheit according to the car's thermometer. Or maybe I was just in shock. Probably both. Come on, I whispered, pressing the horn again. The sound echoed off the empty buildings. Somebody be here, please. Minutes crawled by. I tried focusing on mundane details to keep the panic at bay. The torn sleeve of my shirt, the way my breath fogged the windshield, the metallic taste in my mouth. Anything but the memory of massive teeth and hot breath. Headlights swept across the parking lot. A green Ranger truck pulled up, gravel crunching under its tires. The door opened and a uniformed figure stepped out, then froze at the sight of my blood-smeared Explorer.
Jesus Christ.
The ranger, his nameplate read Peterson, rushed to my window. Sir, can you hear me? I managed a nod which sent the world spinning. Bear, I croaked. Grizzly. Savage River Campsite. Peterson's radio crackled to life. This is Ranger Peterson at the Savage River Station. We need immediate medical response. Possible code 702. He paused, looking at my shoulder. Scratch that. Confirmed 702. Bear attack victim with significant trauma. More vehicles arrived as Peterson helped me out of the car. My legs buckled, but he caught me. The morning air felt like ice against my wet skin. Easy now, he said, guiding me toward the station. Let's get you inside. Can you tell me your name? Mark. Mark Allen. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. I registered yesterday. The solo camper. Peterson nodded, recognition crossing his face. Sarah's your emergency contact. My sister. The station's interior lights buzzed to life, harsh fluorescence that made everything too sharp, too real. Don't call her yet, please. She'll freak out. Let's get you looked at first. Another ranger appeared with a first aid kit. They eased me onto a chair, and Peterson began cutting away what remained of my shirt. The fabric had stuck to the wounds in places, pulling away with fresh trails of blood. Holy shit! The second ranger breathed. I looked down. My shoulder was a mess of puncture wounds, the flesh torn and mangled where the bear had shaken me. Already, dark bruising spread across my chest and down my arm. Hold still, Peterson instructed, pressing gauze pads against the worst spots. Paramedics are 10 minutes out. Can you tell me what happened? I tried, but the words came in fragments. Tent, sleeping, the teeth. That's okay, he said. Take it slow. Randy, get his vitals. The second ranger wrapped a blood pressure cuff around my good arm. BP's 90/60. Pulse 120. Shock, Peterson nodded. Get the thermal blanket. A metallic rustling, then something light settled across my shoulders. I hadn't realized I was still shaking. The bear, I managed. It's still out there, near the campsite. We'll send a team out once it's lighter, Peterson assured me. Right now, you're the priority. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The station door opened again, admitting a woman in a khaki uniform. Her badge identified her as the park's wildlife biologist. Mr. Allen? She pulled up a chair.
I'm Dr. Chen.
I know this is difficult, but I need to document your injuries while they're fresh. May I take some photos? I nodded. The camera flash made me flinch. The bite radius will help us identify which bear it was, she explained, measuring the distance between puncture wounds. Male grizzly, based on the spacing. Probably the one we tagged last spring. She looked at her measurements again. Yeah, this matches bear 211's dentition pattern. Tagged. My voice cracked. You know this bear? We've been tracking him. He's been pushing closer to campgrounds lately, but this is the first attack. She caught Peterson's warning look. Sorry, that's probably not helpful right now. The paramedics arrived in a burst of activity and urgent voices. They worked efficiently, cutting away more clothing, starting in 4, checking pupils. Their clinical terminology washed over me. Multiple deep lacerations, possible fracture, significant blood loss. Sir? Mr. Allen? One paramedic drew my attention. We're going to transport you to Fairbanks. The shoulder's going to need surgery. My car, I protested weakly. My gear. We'll take care of everything, Peterson promised. Right now, you focus on you. They lifted me onto a stretcher. As they wheeled me out, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the station window. Blood-streaked face, wide shocked eyes. Already, bruises were darkening along my neck and jaw. Wait, I called to Peterson. The registration box. The claw marks. You should've. We'll do a full investigation, he assured me. But Dr. Chen's right. Let's worry about you first. The ambulance doors closed, and the siren started up. Through the small window, I watched the station recede. Somewhere out there, beyond the steel and antiseptic smell and urgent medical chatter, a huge grizzly was probably sleeping off its encounter with bear spray, my blood still on its teeth. The last thing I heard before the painkillers took hold was one paramedic radioing ahead to Fairbanks. Incoming bear attack victim, 47-year-old male, multiple deep puncture wounds, preparing for emergency surgery. Then darkness took me, and for a while, there were no bears in it. 2 days after the attack, Dr. Chun stood beside my hospital bed in Fairbanks, comparing photographs of my sutured shoulder to a series of dental charts on her tablet. The morning light through the window cast harsh shadows across the wounds, 47 stitches worth of evidence. The spacing between the canine punctures is consistent, she murmured, measuring with digital calipers on her screen. 10.2 centimeters. And see this distinctive chip mark here. She pointed to a jagged tear near my collarbone. That matches Bear 211's broken lower canine. We documented it during his last tagging. I tried to focus on her clinical detachment, treating my shoulder like a puzzle to be solved rather than the site of my near-death experience. It helped somehow. Tell me about him, I said, my voice still hoarse from the breathing tube they'd used during surgery. Bear 211. Dr. Chun settled into the visitor's chair, sliding her glasses up her nose. Male grizzly, approximately 12 years old. We first tagged him in 2019. He's one of our largest residents. Last weight was 812 pounds. But he's probably over 850 now with winter coming. 850 pounds. I closed my eyes, remembering the crushing weight on my chest. This is the first time he's attacked a human, she continued. But he's been showing increasingly bold behavior, breaking into food storage, approaching campgrounds during daylight hours. She hesitated. We've been considering relocation options. But not euthanasia? The question came out sharper than I intended. Mr. Allen, I understand your feelings, but do you? I gestured at my shoulder with my good arm. Did you almost get eaten alive in your sleep? Her expression softened. No, I haven't, and I'm truly sorry for what happened to you. But Bear 211 was following his instincts in his natural habitat. The attack, while traumatic, wasn't predatory. If it had been, she didn't need to finish. We both knew I wouldn't be alive for this conversation. A knock at the door interrupted us. Ranger Peterson entered, followed by 2 other officials I didn't recognize. Mr. Allen, Peterson nodded. How are you feeling today? Like I got chewed up by an 850-pound garbage disposal. I attempted a smile, but it felt wrong on my face. Any news from the campsite? Peterson pulled out his notebook. We found your campsite destroyed, just as you described. Massive tracks circling where your tent had been. We got good casts of those. The spacing and size match Bear 211's previous prints. One of the unknown officials stepped forward. Jim Harrison, Park Service Investigation Unit. We need to document everything for our incident report. Do you feel up to walking us through it again? I nodded, though my stomach clenched at the thought of reliving it. For the next hour, I recounted every detail, the warning signs I'd ignored, the sounds, the attack itself. Harrison recorded everything on his tablet while the others took notes. Your backpack was recovered about 50 yards into the brush, Peterson added when I finished. The bite marks. He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Show me, I said. Dr. Chun pulled up photos on her tablet. My once sturdy backpack was in shreds, with 2 distinct sets of puncture marks. The first set had torn through the shoulder strap. The second had pierced the main compartment right where my spine would have been. Jesus, I breathed. You did everything right, Harrison assured me. Bear spray, proper food storage, making noise. Sometimes these encounters just happen. A newspaper photographer arrived next, asking for photos of my injuries for a story they were running. Local news, Peterson explained. They needed to warn other campers about increased bear activity in the area. We'll run on page 6, Harrison said, next to the high school football scores. By next week, someone's lost cat will be bigger news. That should have bothered me more than it did. But there was something almost comforting about the mundane way the bureaucracy processed my brush with death. Forms to fill out, boxes to check, Everything neat and orderly, even if I wasn't. One last thing, I said as they prepared to leave. The bear. You won't euthanize him? Dr. Chun shook her head. The incident report will note that the encounter occurred in his natural habitat, with no evidence of predatory behavior. He'll likely be relocated. But, good. The word surprised me as much as them. I mean, it wasn't personal, right? He was just being a bear. That's a very enlightened view, Mr. Allen. I looked down at my bandaged shoulder. Maybe, or maybe I just need to believe that something that big, that powerful, wasn't actually trying to kill me. That I'm alive because it chose not to finish the job, not just because of blind luck. Harrison cleared his throat. Well, we'll need you to sign these incident reports. Standard procedures. I scrawled my signature with my good hand, watching as my experience was reduced to official language and incident codes. Somewhere out there, Bear 211 was going about his day, probably already having forgotten our encounter. Just another odd interaction with those strange, soft creatures that kept wandering into his territory. As the officials filed out, Dr. Chun paused at the door. The local news team wants to interview you once you're stronger. It would help raise awareness about bear safety. I thought about trying to describe the indescribable, the primal terror, the pain, the strange peace that came with accepting death as inevitable. How could you convey that to someone watching the evening news while eating dinner? Tell them I declined, I said. Some stories should stay in the wilderness. She nodded, understanding. Rest well, Mr. Allen. And I'm glad you survived. Yeah. I touched my shoulder gently. Me too. The hospital mirror didn't lie. 3 weeks after the attack, I stood shirtless in my bathroom, cataloging the damage. The stitches had come out yesterday, leaving angry red constellations across my left shoulder and upper chest. Each puncture wound told its own story. The initial bite, the shaking, the desperate attempt to get free. Dr. Morrison, my surgeon, said the scars would fade to white over time, but would never disappear completely. The good news, she'd said during my last checkup, is that there's no sign of infection. The bad news, she gestured to my shoulder's limited range of motion. You've got some work ahead of you. That work began today. The physical therapy center smelled of antiseptic and rubber mats, with motivational posters featuring mountains and eagles on the walls. Ironic, given my new relationship with wilderness inspiration. Mr. Allen? A woman in blue scrubs approached, clipboard in hand. I'm Tracy, your PT. Ready to get started? I nodded, already dreading what was coming. The first exercise seemed simple enough, lifting my arm forward, just to shoulder height. The pain hit like lightning. Jesus! I gasped, arm dropping. Breathe through it, Tracy encouraged. The bear damaged your rotator cuff and deltoid muscle. We need to rebuild strength without compromising the repair. The bear, I echoed. Even now, 3 weeks later, those words felt surreal. For the next hour, Tracy put me through a series of exercises, each one revealing new limitations, new pains. Stretches that should have been basic became mountains to climb. By the end, sweat soaked my shirt and my arm trembled with fatigue. Good work, she said, making notes in my chart. But this is just the beginning. We're looking at 3 to 6 months of therapy, depending on how you progress. That night, the nightmare came again. They'd been getting worse, not better. In this one, I was back in the tent, but the walls were made of bear's teeth. They closed in slowly, grinding together while hot breath fogged the air. I woke up screaming, sheets soaked with sweat instead of blood this time. My phone showed 3:17 a.m., the exact time the bear had first touched my tent. Some coincidences felt like the universe playing cruel jokes. A text from Sarah lit up the screen. You okay? Called out in your sleep again. Neighbors complained. I'd been staying with her since the hospital, unable to face my empty apartment. My hands shook as I typed back. I'm fine. Go back to sleep. Liar, she responded. Want me to come over? No, really.
I'm okay.
But I wasn't. The physical therapy session had shaken loose something raw and dark. I found myself opening my laptop, typing grizzly bear attack survivors into the search bar. The results were a mixture of sensational news stories and clinical studies. One headline caught my eye: Local man survives bear attack, story at 6. The newscast was painful to watch. They'd interviewed me in the hospital, still dazed from pain medication. The reporter made it sound like a heroic tale of survival, but all I could see was the fear in my eyes, the way I kept touching my bandaged shoulder as if to make sure it was still there. Interest had faded quickly, just as Ranger Harrison had predicted. By the next week, my story had been replaced by high school sports and local politics. The wilderness had tried to kill me, and the world had barely noticed. In my garage, my camping gear sat untouched where Sarah had stored it. The shredded tent was in a plastic bag. Evidence. The Rangers had called it, though I couldn't bear to throw it away. My sleeping bag, destroyed beyond recognition. The backpack with its telling puncture marks. Each item a testament to how close I'd come to becoming another statistic. During my next PT session, Tracy noticed something odd. "Your muscle tension increases when it rains," she said, working on my shoulder. "That's not unusual with injuries, but..." "It's not the rain," I admitted. "It's the sound on nylon. Like claws on a tent." She paused, then made a note in my file. "Have you considered talking to someone? We have excellent trauma counselors." "I'm fine." "Mr. Allen Mark, you survived something few people have. It's okay to need help processing that." I watched my reflection in the therapy room mirror, seeing the scars that traced paths across my skin like roads on some terrible map. What's to process? I went camping. A bear tried to eat me. I lived. End of story. "Is it?" She gestured to my shoulder, where the muscles had knotted with tension. "Your body's still fighting that bear, Mark. Every day." That night, I finally opened the garage door. The pile of camping gear sat accusingly in the corner, still smelling faintly of bear spray and fear. With my good arm, I pulled out the shredded tent. The nylon was destroyed beyond repair, but I couldn't throw it away. Not yet. It had been my shelter, however briefly, my illusory protection against the wilderness. And in its destruction, it had become something else: proof. Proof that it hadn't been a dream or a drunken story. Proof that I had faced something ancient and terrible and lived. I touched one of the tiers, feeling the rough edges where claws had parted the fabric as easily as water. The shoulder that Bear 211 had tried to tear from my body ached with phantom pain, a reminder that some wounds never truly heal. They just become part of who you are, like rings in a tree marking years of growth and damage. My phone buzzed, another text from Sarah. "Local news running bear attack story again. Some woman got bluff charged near Savage River. You okay?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "No, but I will be." It wasn't much, but it was the first honest thing I'd said in weeks. 6 months after the attack, spring thaw transformed Denali National Park. Snow retreated from the valleys, exposing the earth beneath. I stood at the Savage River trailhead, my rental car the only vehicle in the parking lot. My own Explorer was still in the shop. I'd been unable to sit in it after the attack, the bloodstains on the driver's seat too vivid a reminder. "You don't have to do this," Sarah had said when I told her my plans to return. "No one would blame you for staying away, but I did have to do it." The nightmares wouldn't stop until I did. The registration box stood exactly as I remembered it, though weather had darkened the claw marks I'd seen that autumn evening. My hand shook slightly as I signed in. Name: Mark Allen. Destination: Savage River Day hike only. Return: 5 p.m. today. Emergency contact: Sarah Allen. "Mr. Allen?" A familiar voice called out. Ranger Peterson approached from the station, looking surprised. "Didn't expect to see you back here." "Neither did I," I admitted, unconsciously touching my shoulder. The scars had faded to pink, but the muscles still ached in cold weather. "How's our mutual friend? Bear 211? Peterson checked his tablet. "Still in his territory. We've tracked him near Savage River several times this week. He's following his usual patterns. No more incidents since..." Well, since he tried to tear me apart. The words hung unspoken between us. The woman who was bluff charged last fall? Shaken up, but fine. She did everything right, made noise, stood her ground, had her spray ready. He backed off. Peterson studied me carefully. You're not planning to camp, are you? God, no. I forced a laugh that sounded hollow even to me. I need to see it. The sight. You understand. He nodded slowly. Want company? Thanks, but no. This is something I need to do alone. The trail hadn't changed. Same twisting path through black spruce, same patches of early spring wildflowers. But everything felt different. Every shadow held potential menace. Every rustle in the undergrowth made my heart race. My physical therapist would have been proud of how I managed the hike. Months of rehabilitation had restored most of my shoulder's range of motion, though it would never be quite the same. The surgeons had needed to reconstruct part of my rotator cuff using donor tissue. A miracle it wasn't worse, they'd said. I hadn't felt particularly miraculous at the time. The clearing where I'd camped appeared suddenly around a bend. Nature had erased all obvious signs of the attack. No torn tent fabric, no blood-stained ground, no sign that 6 months ago, a man had nearly died here. But looking closer, I could see subtle changes. New growth where the tent had crushed the vegetation. A fallen branch that hadn't been there before. Hello, I called out, more from habit than necessity. Just passing through. A sound from the brush made me freeze. Something large was moving through the undergrowth about 50 yards ahead. My hand went instinctively to the bear spray on my belt. I carried 2 canisters now, one on each hip. The branches parted, and I saw it. Fresh bear tracks in a patch of mud. They were huge, the clear impression showing 5 toes and a pad wider than my outstretched hand. The same size as the prints I'd seen that night. My heart thundered in my chest. The tracks were fresh, the edges still sharp, water just beginning to seep into the deepest parts. Bear 211 had passed through here recently. Very recently. Hey, bear! I called again, my voice stronger this time. Coming through. The wind shifted, bringing with it that familiar musky scent that had haunted my nightmares. Wild, primal, bear. I should have been terrified, should have turned and run. Instead, I found myself moving forward, following the tracks. They led to a small clearing where the bear had clearly been digging for roots. A typical spring behavior, the rangers had told me. Nothing personal, nothing predatory, just a bear being a bear. A branch snapped somewhere in the forest, the sound echoing through the trees. I turned slowly, scanning the undergrowth. There, a flash of movement between the spruce trees. A massive shape, cinnamon brown fur gilded by the morning sun. Bear 211 moved with surprising grace for his size, paying me no attention as he ambled along his ancient paths. I stood perfectly still, bear spray at ready, watching him disappear into the forest. The same bear that had nearly killed me, going about his day as if our violent intersection had never happened. In his world, perhaps it hadn't. I was just another strange encounter in a life filled with the simple imperatives of survival. My shoulder ached with remembered pain, but something else ached too. Something deeper. This place wasn't mine. Never had been. I was just a visitor here, in a land where bears had roamed for millennia before humans dared to pitch their flimsy tents. Goodbye, I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was addressing Bear 211 or some part of myself that had died here 6 months ago. The walk back felt different. The shadows were just shadows. The rustling was just wind in leaves. My fear hadn't disappeared. It never would. But it had transformed into something else. Respect, maybe, or understanding. Ranger Peterson was waiting at the trailhead. See anything interesting? I looked back at the wilderness, where somewhere, a massive grizzly continued his spring foraging. Neither malevolent nor merciful, simply wild. No, I said, just ghosts. He nodded as if he understood. Maybe he did. When I signed out at the registration box, I noticed my hand wasn't shaking anymore. The claw marks in the wood that had terrified me 6 months ago now seemed like trail markers, pointing the way forward. Not into the wilderness. I'd never camp alone again, but into whatever came next. The scars on my shoulder tingled as I drove away, a reminder that some marks never fade. But maybe they're not supposed to. Maybe they're maps showing us where we've been, and more importantly, what we survived. 1 year after the attack, I sat in my office in Seattle, watching storm clouds gather over Puget Sound. My shoulder had begun its familiar aching. It always did before rain. The meteorologists called it a barometric pressure response. I called it my personal weather station. Still hurts. Dr. Reeves, my trauma counselor, asked during our monthly session. She'd noticed me rubbing the scars through my shirt. Not like before, I said. More like a reminder. Of what? I considered the question, watching lightning flicker across the darkening sky. That I'm alive. That I wasn't supposed to be. The physical scars had faded to silvery white, mapping constellations across my shoulder and chest. 47 stitch marks, each one a testament to how close I'd come to becoming another wilderness statistic. The muscles had healed as well as they ever would. 90% mobility, the physical therapist said. Good enough for most things, though I'd never rock climb again. But it was the invisible marks that lingered most deeply. Tell me about the dreams, Dr. Reeves prompted. They've changed, I admitted. I'm still in the tent, still feel the weight crushing down. But now, sometimes I'm the bear too. I feel its hunger, its simple need to survive. The complete absence of malice. She made a note in her pad. That's progress. You're integrating the experience, seeing it from multiple perspectives. Try explaining that to my camping buddies. I gave a short laugh. They don't understand why I won't join them in the backcountry anymore. Lightning doesn't strike twice, they say. But bears do. Exactly. I touched my shoulder again, feeling the ridged tissue beneath my shirt. They weren't there. They didn't feel teeth designed to crack moose bones trying to tear their arm off. They didn't have to explain to the ER doctors why their shoulder looked like it had gone through a meat grinder. The storm broke outside, rain hammering against the windows. Each drop on glass sounded like claws on nylon. But the panic that sound once triggered had dulled to mere unease. Progress of sorts. My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. News says Bear 211 was spotted near Savage River again. You okay? I smiled slightly. She still checked on me whenever bears made the news. I'm fine. He's just doing bear things. It was true. The ranger's updates showed Bear 211 following his normal patterns, neither more nor less aggressive after our encounter. In his world, I had been just another strange incident in a life governed by seasons and instincts. The trauma had been entirely one-sided. My desk drawer held a manila envelope containing everything from that night. The Park Service incident report, medical records, photos of the destroyed campsite, news clippings that had already begun to yellow, and one photograph I'd never shown anyone, my shoulder the day after surgery, before the swelling had gone down, when you could still clearly see the shape of the bear's jaw outlined in bruises and torn flesh. Have you looked at them recently? Dr. Reeves asked, noticing me glance at the drawer. No need. I tapped my shoulder. I have the Cliff's Notes version right here. Sometimes, late at night when sleep proved elusive, I'd find myself on bear-related websites, reading statistics and survival stories. Some attacks were worse than mine, some better. All of us carried different scars, different memories. But we shared one thing, the knowledge that wilderness was not just beautiful but terrible, not just awe-inspiring but awful, in the original sense of the word. The hardest part, I told Dr. Reeves, is that no one really believes how bad it was. They see the scars, sure, but they don't understand. Can't understand. It's like trying to describe a color to someone who's never seen it. And how do you feel about that? Honestly, some days I'm grateful they don't understand. Other days, I gestured to the storm outside. Other days it's lonely, carrying something this big by myself. The rain intensified, and with it, the ache in my shoulder. Phantom pains shot down my arm, nerve damage, the doctors said, might never fully heal. Like the weather prediction, like the scars, like the memories, it was just one more thing to carry. I still camp, I said suddenly. Not alone, never in the backcountry, but car camping with other people. Some would say that's brave. What would you say? That it's necessary. Like going back to Savage River was necessary. If I let the fear win completely, then I didn't survive. Not really. Lightning flashed again, closer now. In that brief illumination, I caught my reflection in the window. The man looking back seemed older than he had a year ago, more weathered. Like a tree that had survived a storm, bent but not broken. The bear's still out there, I said quietly, following ancient paths, doing what bears have done for millennia. Neither good nor evil, just wild. And maybe that's the biggest lesson in all of this. Nature doesn't care about our stories, our trauma, our survival. It just is. Dr. Reeves nodded. And how does that make you feel? Smaller, I admitted, but also more real. Like I understand something fundamental now, something you can't learn from books or websites or secondhand stories. Something you can only learn from having very large teeth very close to your throat. The storm was directly overhead now. Each thunderclap made the windows rattle. My shoulder throbbed in time with the lightning, a Morse code of memory and pain. But I didn't try to massage away the ache. Didn't take the prescribed painkillers that still sat in my medicine cabinet. Instead, I let it wash over me. This reminder of what I'd survived, what I'd learned, what I'd become. After all, some scars are meant to be felt. The morning sun slanted through my cabin windows, casting long shadows across the rough wooden floor. I stood in front of my depleted woodpile, coffee mug warming my hands against the early autumn chill. Only 3 logs remained stacked beside the river rock fireplace. Barely enough for tonight, let alone the approaching storm. Damn it, I muttered, taking another sip of my cooling coffee. The weather radio crackled on my kitchen counter, its scratchy voice a constant companion in my solitary life out here in Wyoming's Bighorn Mountains. Expect temperatures to drop significantly over the next 48 hours as an early winter storm system moves through the region. Current projections show. I turned the volume down and walked to my cluttered desk, where yesterday's trail map lay spread out among various bills and untouched paperwork. My finger traced the path I'd taken during yesterday's hike, stopping at the marked cluster of fallen trees about a mile from my cabin. Perfect spot, I said to myself, remembering the tangle of dead timber I'd spotted. The Forest Service had cleared most of the deadfall after last spring's windstorm, but they'd missed this pocket. Their oversight was my gain if I could haul enough back before the storm hit. The coffee machine sputtered its last drops as I studied the map. The sound reminded me of my sister Sarah's last visit, her voice full of concern about my choice to live alone out here. "Jane, you know I worry," she'd said, watching me stack firewood that day. "What if something happens? You're too isolated." I hadn't told her about the satellite phone tucked away in my emergency kit, or the bear spray I carried on my belt during every excursion. No need to fuel her anxiety. Besides, I'd lived here for 3 years without incident. The local wildlife and I had an understanding. I stayed alert and respectful. They kept their distance. Walking to my bedroom, I pulled on my favorite flannel shirt. Red and black checkers faded from countless washes. The thermal layer underneath would be enough for now, though I grabbed my wool jacket too. The weather radio had been wrong before, but better prepared than frozen. My worn hiking boots waited by the door, their leather scratched and creased from miles of mountain trails. As I laced them up, my fingers brushed against a new cut in the left boot's side. Must have caught it on something yesterday, though I couldn't remember when. The nagging voice in my head, the one that sounded suspiciously like Sarah, whispered that I should wait until tomorrow. The park ranger station would be fully staffed then, and my friend Mike would be on duty. He'd mentioned stopping by with his chainsaw to help with my winter wood supply. "Can't wait," I said aloud, silencing the voice. The storm would be here by then, and I needed the wood now. Besides, I'd done this countless times before. I gathered my gear methodically. Wood carrier, work gloves, water bottle, protein bar, and yes, the bear spray. The weight of the canister on my hip was reassuring, though I'd never had to use it. Black bears weren't usually aggressive, and the grizzlies rarely came this low into the bighorns. The preparation felt almost ritualistic now, each item a talisman against the wilderness beyond my porch. I'd learned these habits from old Jack Thompson, my nearest neighbor until his passing last winter. His cabin stood empty now, 3 miles down the valley. Always respect the mountain, he used to say, but never let fear keep you from living on it. I checked my watch, 8:17 a.m. Plenty of time to gather wood and be back before the weather turned. The morning air hit my face as I stepped onto the porch, crisp and clean in that way only mountain mornings can be. My boots creaked against the wooden steps as I descended, each sound sharp in the quiet. The forest stretched before me, a maze of lodgepole pines and aspens painted in autumn colors. A chickadee darted between branches, its familiar call breaking the morning silence. Everything looked exactly as it had yesterday, and the day before, and all the days since I'd made this place my home. I adjusted the empty wood carrier at my side, its familiar weight swinging like a pendulum. The trail beckoned, winding into the trees where shadows still clung to the morning. One last look at my cabin. Smoke curling from the chimney, windows reflecting the rising sun, and I started walking. Just another morning, I said to myself, leaves crunching beneath my feet. Just another bundle of wood. I couldn't have known then how wrong I was. Couldn't have noticed how the chickadee's song would be the last I'd hear that morning, or how the shadows between the trees seemed deeper than usual. Nature holds its secrets close, and the mountain knew what waited for me among those fallen trees. But in that moment, breathing in the crisp autumn air, I was still just Jane Foster, gathering wood for her cabin's fireplace. The morning stretched ahead like countless others before it, and my only concern was whether I'd need my jacket for the walk back. The wooden steps creaked one final time as I stepped onto the trail, leaving the safety of my cabin behind. Somewhere in the forest ahead, something dark and hungry was waiting, but that was a horror for another hour. For now, there was just the quiet, the cold, and the promise of winter in the air. The familiar trail stretched before me, worn smooth by my own footsteps over the years. My empty wood carrier swayed with each step, its hollow wooden thunk against my leg keeping time like a metronome. The morning sun filtered through the canopy, creating shifting patterns on the forest floor that almost made me miss the first sign something was wrong. I paused, frowning at a cluster of scattered pine cones near the trail's edge. They weren't just fallen, they were torn apart, their scales stripped and scattered in a way I'd never seen before. Kneeling down, I picked up one of the mangled cones, running my finger along the fresh teeth marks that scarred its surface. "That's not from a squirrel," I muttered, dropping the cone and wiping my hand on my jeans. The marks were too large, too aggressive. Something big had been feeding here, and recently. The silence hit me then. No chickadees calling from the branches. No squirrels chattering their complaints. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, leaving the forest in an unnatural stillness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Hello," I called out, immediately regretting breaking the silence. My voice sounded small and foreign in the quiet forest. The word hung in the air for a moment before being swallowed by the stillness. I reached down and touched the bare spray on my hip, drawing comfort from its solid presence. The rational part of my brain tried to dismiss my growing unease. Wildlife was common here, and signs of feeding weren't unusual. But something felt different today, something in the air that spoke to more primitive parts of my mind. 20 yards ahead, something caught my eye. The morning light hit a pale patch on a large pine tree, standing out against the dark bark. As I approached, my breath caught in my throat. Fresh claw marks scored the trunk, stretching well above my head, higher than any black bear I'd ever encountered should be able to reach. "Jesus," I whispered, placing my hand against the marks for scale. My fingers looked tiny compared to the gouges in the wood. Sap still oozed from some of the deeper cuts, glistening in the filtered sunlight. The local rangers had taught me about bear signs during my first year here. Black bears mark trees, Mike had explained during one of his visits. But they're usually not much taller than a person can reach. If you see marks way up high, that's either a really big black bear or... He hadn't needed to finish the sentence. Grizzlies were rare in this part of the Bighorns, but not impossible. I pulled out my phone, thinking to call the ranger station, but the screen showed no signal, typical for this section of the trail. A branch snapped somewhere in the forest, the sound sharp as a gunshot in the silence. I spun toward the noise, my heart pounding. Nothing moved between the trees, but the shadows suddenly seemed deeper, more threatening. "Get it together, Jane," I said aloud, trying to steady my nerves with the sound of my own voice. "You've done this walk 100 times." I started walking again, but slower now, more deliberately. Each step was placed with care, trying to minimize the sound of leaves crunching beneath my boots. The wood carrier felt awkward and unwieldy, but I didn't dare leave it behind. It was my excuse for being out here, my reason for pushing forward despite every instinct telling me to turn back. That's when I saw the tracks. They were pressed into a patch of mud where the morning dew had softened the ground. Massive paw prints, easily twice the size of my spread hand, headed in the same direction I was walking. The tracks were so fresh that water was still seeping into the deepest parts of the impressions. I crouched down, studying the prints with a detachment that felt almost dreamlike. 5 toes, thick claws, a pad wider than my fist. Definitely a bear, and a big one. The rangers had shown me track casts during my wilderness safety course, but these were larger than any I remembered. "It's just passing through," I told myself, standing up and brushing dirt from my knees. "They don't stick around one area long." But even as I said it, I noticed more signs I'd been too preoccupied to see earlier. Broken branches at bare height, tufts of dark fur caught on bark, small trees pushed aside, their trunks still bearing fresh scars. The trail ahead was littered with evidence of a large predator, and I'd walked right into its territory. My destination, the fallen trees with their promise of firewood, was just ahead. I could see the clearing through the trees, morning light illuminating the tangle of dead trunks. It would be simple to turn back, to return tomorrow with Mike and his chainsaw, to be safe rather than sorry. The wind picked up suddenly, rushing through the canopy with a sound like exhaling breath. It carried a scent I didn't recognize at first, musky, wild, with an undertone that made my stomach clench. My hand moved to the bear spray again, unsnapping the safety strap by instinct. Another branch snapped, closer this time. Then another. Something large was moving through the forest parallel to the trail, hidden by the thick undergrowth. Each crack of wood was accompanied by the soft sound of leaves being pushed aside by a heavy body. I stood frozen, the wood carrier hanging uselessly at my side. The morning's earlier warmth had vanished, replaced by a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Every story I'd ever heard about bear encounters ran through my mind, each one ending worse than the last. The falling trees were just ahead, maybe 50 yards. In the shadows between the dead trunks, something dark moved, and 2 small eyes reflected the filtered sunlight. They fixed on me with an intelligence that was somehow worse than simple animal hunger. I found my firewood, but something else had found me first. The fallen tree area stretched before me like the aftermath of some giant's game of pick-up sticks. Massive trunks lay crossed and tangled, their exposed roots reaching toward the sky like grasping fingers. But it wasn't the dead trees that held my attention. It was the dark shape moving between their shadows, deliberate and purposeful. My breath fogged in the suddenly cold air as I watched the movement. Years of living in bear country had taught me the standard advice. Make noise, look big, back away slowly. But my body refused to move, locked in place by a more primitive response to finding myself in the presence of an apex predator. A low grunt echoed from behind one of the rotting logs, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy paws shifting through the autumn leaves. The noise sparked some life back into my frozen limbs, and I began to slowly reach for my bear spray. "Hey bear," I called out, my voice shaking despite my attempt to sound confident. "I see you there. I'm just gonna back away nice and slow." Another grunt answered me, closer this time. Through gaps in the fallen trees, I caught glimpses of black fur moving with a fluid grace that belied its owner's size. A branch snapped under an unseen weight, the crack sharp as a rifle shot in the tense silence. The wood carrier suddenly felt ridiculous in my hand. a flimsy stick of civilization in the face of raw nature. I wanted to drop it, to free both hands for what I knew was coming, but fear had locked my fingers around its handle. "It's okay," I continued, taking one careful step backward. "This is your space. I'm leaving now. No threat here." A tuft of dark fur snagged on a broken branch caught my eye, still swaying from the bear's passage. It was fresh, still carrying the musky scent I'd detected earlier. The bear was marking its territory, and I was an unwelcome intruder. My heel caught on something, a root or fallen branch, and I stumbled slightly. The movement drew an immediate response. A deep, huffing breath from behind the nearest log, followed by the sound of something massive rising to its feet. Time seemed to slow as two small eyes reflected the filtered sunlight, fixed directly on me from 30 feet away. They were set in a head that seemed impossibly large, mounted on shoulders that rippled with muscle beneath thick black fur. The bear rose slowly to its full height, and my mind struggled to accept what I was seeing. "Oh God!" I whispered, the words escaping without conscious thought. It was a black bear, but larger than any I'd ever seen or heard of. Ruffle my hair. I could hear the snap of its jaws. Imagine those yellowed teeth inches from my back. My hand brushed against the bear spray's canister, but there was no time to draw it, no chance to turn and aim. Every fraction of a second was devoted to forward motion, to the next step, to not falling. An exposed root stretched across my path like a tripwire. In my panic, my tired legs couldn't lift high enough to clear it. My foot caught, and for one suspended moment, I was flying rather than running. Time slowed enough for me to appreciate the cruel irony. I'd walked past that same root hundreds of times, always careful to step over it. The impact drove the air from my lungs in an explosive grunt. Fallen leaves and dirt filled my screaming mouth as I hit the forest floor face first. Pain shot through my palms and knees where they struck hidden rocks. The bear spray's canister dug into my hip, a final useless defense. Behind me, the bear's momentum carried it several steps past my fallen form. Its claws scrabbled against earth as it turned, and I managed to roll onto my back just in time to see its massive form looming over me. Those small, dark eyes locked onto mine with terrible intent. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity what Jack Thompson had meant about respecting the mountain. This wasn't about territory or food or aggression. This was nature's reminder that we are not masters here, just visitors who sometimes overstay our welcome. The bear's head lowered, hot saliva dripping from its open jaws. I could see every detail with horrific precision. The scar tissue on its shoulder, the silver-tipped fur around its face, the yellowed teeth that could crush bone like twigs. Its breath smelled of pine sap and raw meat, the scent of a predator that needed no weapons but its own body. "Oh God," I whispered, bringing my arms up in a futile attempt to protect my face. "Please no." The massive paws descended toward me like twin avalanches, and I knew with terrible certainty that my story might end here, on the forest floor, less than a mile from my cabin's safety. All because I'd needed firewood on the wrong autumn morning. My world narrowed to those descending paws, the curved claws catching morning sunlight like polished hooks. The bear's shadow fell across my face, blotting out the sky visible through the canopy above. In that last moment before impact, a strange calm settled over me, the peace of knowing that no decision remained to be made, no escape remained to be attempted. Then the pause struck, and calm shattered into pure, animal terror. The massive paws slammed into my back with the force of a sledgehammer, driving what little air remained from my lungs in an explosive gasp. The impact pressed me deeper into the forest floor, dead leaves and soil grinding against my face. My chest couldn't expand against the crushing weight. I was being pressed into the earth like a fossil in the making. "Can't breathe," I wheezed, though there was no one to hear. The pressure lifted for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to drag in half a breath before the bear's weight shifted. I felt its hot breath on the back of my neck, heard the wet sound of its mouth opening. This was how it would end. A quick bite to the spine, the way predators had killed prey for millions of years. Instead, the bear's attention shifted lower. Sharp claws tore through my jeans like they were tissue paper, leaving burning trails of fire across my right leg. The pain was immediate and intense, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I could feel warm blood beginning to flow, soaking what remained of my shredded pants.
No.
I screamed, the sound more animal than human. The pain broke through my paralysis, triggering a desperate surge of survival instinct. I rolled, or tried to, managing only to twist enough to see my attacker. The bear's face filled my vision, black nose glistening with moisture, yellowed teeth and dark gums visible in its partially open mouth, those small eyes still fixed on me with that terrible intelligence. This close, I could see the gray hairs sprinkled through its muzzle. This wasn't a young bear testing boundaries. This was an experienced predator. The morning sun caught the silver tips of its fur, creating a halo effect that would have been beautiful in any other circumstance. Instead, it just highlighted the massive shoulders, the powerful neck, the killing tools nature had honed over millennia. My hands scrabbled desperately in the leaves beside me, searching for anything that might help. The bear spray was pinned beneath my body, unreachable. My fingers brushed something solid, a fallen branch, thick as my wrist and about 2 feet long. Without conscious thought, I grabbed it. The bear's head descended toward my face, jaws opening wider. Its breath smelled of rotting meat and pine sap, hot against my skin. Time seemed to slow, allowing me to notice absurd details. A leaf caught in its fur, a scar on its lower jaw, the sound of a chickadee calling in the distance as if nothing unusual was happening. Pure instinct took over. I swung the branch with every ounce of strength I had left, aiming for the bear's sensitive nose. The impact sent shocks up my arm, the branch connecting with a solid thunk that surprised both me and the bear. The massive head reared back, a sound between a growl and a whine escaping its throat. Its weight shifted enough for me to drag myself backward through the leaves, leaving smears of blood from my injured leg. The movement sent fresh waves of pain shooting through my body, but survival instinct overrode everything else. "Get back!" I yelled, swinging the branch again, though the bear was now out of reach. "Get away from me!" The bear shook its head violently, pawing at its nose where I'd struck it. A thin line of dark blood trickled from one nostril. I'd actually managed to hurt it, however slightly. Its eyes found me again, but now they held something new alongside the predatory focus: uncertainty. I used that moment of hesitation to continue my retreat, pushing with my good leg while dragging the injured one. Each movement was agony, but I forced myself to keep going. The branch remained clutched in my white-knuckled grip, ready for another swing if needed. Blood ran freely down my leg now, soaking my sock and boot. The claw marks burned like fire, and I could feel torn skin and muscle shifting with each movement. Part of my mind noted clinically that I'd need stitches, if I survived long enough to get them. The bear dropped to all fours, its head lowering again but not advancing. It huffed out sharp breaths, testing the air. My blood scent would be strong now, triggering every predatory instinct it possessed. But the hit to its nose had introduced an element of caution to its behavior. "That's right," I said, my voice shaking but gaining strength. "I'm not easy prey. Back off." More blood dripped from its nose, spattering the leaves below. The bear took a step forward, then stopped, shaking its head again. The mix of blood scent and pain seemed to confuse it, creating a conflict between instinct and experience. I managed to get a fallen log between us, though the effort left me gasping and lightheaded from blood loss. The branch was still my only weapon. The bear spray might as well have been back at my cabin for all the good it did trapped beneath me. "Come on," I whispered, not sure if I was encouraging myself or taunting the bear. "Make a decision." As if in response, the bear sat back on its haunches, regarding me with those unervingly intelligent eyes. Blood continued to drip from its nose, and it pawed at its face occasionally. I could almost see the calculation happening. Was this prey worth the trouble? Would the meal justify the pain? We stayed locked in that tableau for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Me half-propped against the log, branch raised, blood pooling beneath my leg. The bear sitting just out of reach, testing its sore nose, assessing the situation with predatory patience. The moment stretched like a rubber band ready to snap. One wrong move, one sign of weakness, and the attack would resume. But for now, we were at a stalemate. Neither advancing nor retreating, both wounded, both waiting to see what would happen next. The forest held its breath around us, and somewhere in the distance, I heard the wind moving through the trees like the mountain itself sighing. The stalemate broke when a distant train whistle echoed through the valley. The bear's head snapped toward the sound, and I seized my chance. Still clutching the branch, I used the log behind me for support and began my desperate retreat. Each movement sent waves of agony through my torn leg. Blood left a clear trail behind me. Part of my mind noted how bad that was, while another part was simply grateful I could still move at all. I half ran, half crawled toward where I thought my cabin was. Every step a negotiation between speed and pain. "Keep going," I gasped to myself. "Just keep going." The bear's frustrated roars echoed through the trees, but they seemed to be getting fainter. I didn't dare look back to confirm. Every ounce of energy was focused on forward motion. My vision began to blur around the edges. Whether from tears or blood loss, I couldn't tell. The branch I'd used as a weapon became a makeshift crutch, helping me navigate the uneven forest floor. Each time it caught on something, I had to stifle a cry of pain. The sound might bring the bear back, and I couldn't survive another encounter. "Please," I whispered to no one in particular. "Please let me see my cabin." Blood soaked my right boot completely now, making a sick squishing sound with each step. The claw marks burned like fire, and I could feel torn flesh shifting in ways that human flesh was never meant to move. But the pain was almost welcome. It kept me conscious, kept me moving. A branch snapped somewhere behind me, and my heart nearly stopped. I forced myself to move faster, ignoring the protest from my injured leg. The bear's frustrated huffs seemed closer again, the sound of its pursuit crashing through undergrowth growing louder. "No, no, no," I chanted, tears now definitely mixing with the sweat on my face. "Not again, please not again." Through the trees ahead, a glimpse of sunlight reflecting off glass caught my eye. My cabin's windows. The sight was like a shot of adrenaline, giving me strength I didn't know I had left. But the distance seemed impossible, maybe 200 yards through dense forest, every step an exercise in agony. The sound of pursuing footfalls grew louder, accompanied by that terrible huffing breath I'd never forget. The bear had picked up my blood trail. Of course it had. I was leaving a path a child could follow. I abandoned any attempt at quiet movement. Speed was all that mattered now. My injured leg caught on a fallen branch, and I pitched forward, catching myself against a tree trunk. The impact sent fresh waves of pain shooting through my body, but I pushed off again, forcing myself onward. "Help!" I screamed, though I knew my nearest neighbor was miles away. "Somebody help me!" My cabin's roof came fully into view through the canopy. I could see smoke still curling from the chimney. Had it only been an hour since I'd left? Felt like days ago, like another lifetime entirely. The crashes behind me were definitely closer now. The bear was gaining ground, driven by the scent of blood and the frustration of losing its prey. Each impact of its paws against the forest floor sent vibrations I could feel through my boots. 50 yards to go. My leg was on fire, each step leaving a bright red footprint on the fallen leaves. The branch I'd been using as a crutch caught on something and was torn from my grasp. I didn't stop to retrieve it. The cabin was so close now. 40 yards. My vision narrowed to a tunnel, darkness creeping in at the edges. Blood loss was taking its toll, but I couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. The alternative was lying somewhere behind me, moving faster with each passing second. 30 yards. I could see my porch steps now, the morning sun making the weathered wood glow like a beacon. The bear's breathing seemed to fill the world, getting closer with each stride. My own breaths came in ragged gasps, my chest burning with effort. 20 yards. My foot caught on something, a root, a rock, it didn't matter, and I stumbled. The impact drove me to my knees, sending fresh waves of agony through my injured leg. Behind me, I heard the bear's excited huff at my falter. 10 yards. I crawled, pushed, dragged myself forward. The bear's shadow fell across me, but the cabin was right there. So close. Just a few more feet. 5 yards. My hand found the first porch step. I pulled myself up. Strength I didn't know I had propelling me forward. Behind me, claws scrabbled against wood as the bear mounted the steps in pursuit. My fingers closed around the door handle just as another roar filled the air. I threw myself inside, slamming the door shut with my body weight. The impact of the bear hitting the other side nearly tore it open again, but somehow I managed to turn the deadbolt. I collapsed against the door, sliding down to sit in a growing pool of my own blood. Outside, the bear's frustrated roars shook the cabin's windows. Each impact of its massive body against the door sent shivers through the frame, but the heavy wood held. Through my fading vision, I watched dark blood soak into my cabin's wooden floor, spreading in patterns like abstract art. The morning's events felt distant now, dreamlike. Only the pain in my leg and the continued impacts against the door proved it had been real. My trembling hands found my phone in my pocket. The screen was cracked from the fall, but it still worked. I dialed 911, praying I had signal inside the cabin. Outside, the bear paced on my porch, its heavy footfalls a countdown to either my rescue or my end. Through the window, I watched its massive black shape move back and forth, waiting as darkness began to creep into the edges of my consciousness. My trembling hands could barely hold the phone as I dialed 911. Blood from my fingers smeared across the cracked screen, making the numbers blur. Outside, the bear's weight shifted on the porch boards, each creak a reminder of how thin the barrier between us really was. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice seemed to come from very far away. Bear attack, I managed to gasp out.
I'm badly hit.
At my cabin. Ma'am, can you tell me your location? I rattled off my address, the words feeling thick in my mouth. Mile marker 23 off Forest Service Road 412. Green cabin with red shutters. There's still a bear outside. Stay on the line with me, the dispatcher said, her calm voice an anchor to consciousness. I'm dispatching rangers and emergency services now. Can you tell me about your injuries? Another impact against the door made me flinch. My leg. Right leg. The bear's claws. There's a lot of blood. Are you somewhere safe right now? Inside my cabin. But it's still out there. I can see it through the window. Blood continued to soak into my cabin's wooden floor, spreading in an ever-widening pool beneath my injured leg. The sight was oddly fascinating. I'd never known I had so much blood to lose. That thought should have frightened me, but everything felt distant now, wrapped in cotton wool.
Mom?
Stay with me. The dispatcher's voice cut through the fog. Can you apply pressure to the wound? Right? Yes, pressure. The words made sense individually, but stringing them together took effort. I pulled off my flannel shirt, leaving just the thermal underneath, and pressed the wadded fabric against my leg. The pain jolted me back to fuller awareness, drawing a cry I couldn't suppress. Through my window, I watched the massive black shape pace at the forest's edge. The bear moved back and forth with predatory patience, occasionally rising on its hind legs to test the air. Blood still dripped from its nose where I'd struck it. Small comfort now. How long until help arrives? I asked, my voice sounding small and far away. Units are en route. Estimated 15 minutes. Just stay with me, okay? Tell me about the attack. It helps us know what we're dealing with. I described the encounter in halting sentences, each word an effort against increasing lightheadedness. The dispatcher asked occasional questions, keeping me talking, keeping me conscious. But my responses grew shorter, the pauses between them longer. The bear, I said, watching through increasingly blurry vision. So big, bigger than any black bear I've ever seen. There's a scar on its shoulder. Stay focused on my voice. The dispatcher cut in. Help is almost there. Can you hear any sirens yet? I tried to listen past the pounding of my heart, past the bear's occasional huffs outside. The world had narrowed to just this. The rough wood of the door against my back, the hot wetness of blood beneath my leg, the steady voice in my ear promising salvation. Time became fluid, stretching, and contracting like taffy. The dispatcher's voice faded in and out, though I couldn't tell if it was the phone connection or my consciousness wavering. Outside, the bear continued its patient vigil, waiting for me to weaken, to make a mistake, to give it another chance. I should have listened, I mumbled, not sure if I was speaking to the dispatcher or myself. Should have waited for Mike.
Mom?
Stay with me. What's your name? Jane. Jane Foster. Okay, Jane. The Rangers are almost there. Just hold on. Through a haze of pain and blood loss, I heard it. The distant wail of sirens echoing through the valley. The bear heard it too. Its head lifted, ears swiveling toward the sound. Another set of sirens joined the first, growing louder. They're coming, I whispered. I can hear them. The bear rose onto its hind legs again, its full height blocking most of my window view. For a moment, those small dark eyes seemed to meet mine through the glass. There was something there beyond mere animal hunger, a recognition, perhaps, or a promise. Then it dropped to all fours and loped toward the tree line, each powerful stride carrying it further from my cabin. The bear's leaving, I reported, my voice faint even to my own ears. It heard the sirens. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees, casting strange shadows across my cabin walls. The sirens were very close now, accompanied by the sound of vehicles on my gravel driveway. Car doors slammed. Voices called out. Boots crunched on gravel. Jane! A familiar voice called through the door. It's Mike. Are you in there? Mike! I tried to respond, but my voice was barely a whisper now. The dispatcher's voice came through the phone. She's just inside the door. She's lost a lot of blood. More voices outside. Someone rattling the doorknob. Jane, we need you to unlock the door if you can. I looked at the deadbolt. It might as well have been a mile away. My arms felt like lead, and the floor seemed to tilt beneath me. The phone slipped from my nerveless fingers, clattering to the blood-stained wood. Can't, I managed to say, though I wasn't sure anyone could hear me. Can't reach. The last thing I remember clearly was the sound of a key in the lock. Mike using the emergency spare I'd given him last winter, and the door opening carefully behind my slumped form. Then strong hands were lifting me. Voices were shouting medical terms I didn't understand, and the world finally faded to peaceful darkness. I drifted back to consciousness in stages, first aware of voices, then the antiseptic smell of the local clinic, and finally the dull throbbing in my heavily bandaged leg. 2 rangers stood at the foot of my bed. Mike and Sarah Collins, both familiar faces from my year's eye, and the area. Welcome back, Mike said, his usually cheerful face drawn with concern. You gave us quite a scare, Jane. Sarah stepped forward, notebook in hand. How are you feeling? The doctor says you're stable, but we need your statement while the details are still fresh. I shifted in the bed, wincing as the movement sent a spike of pain through my leg. Like I just went 10 rounds with a bear and lost, I managed, attempting a weak smile that neither ranger returned. That's not funny, Mike said, running a hand through his graying hair. You're lucky to be alive. The amount of blood we found. He trailed off, shaking his head. Sarah pulled up a chair beside my bed. Can you walk us through what happened? Every detail helps us track and identify the bear. I recounted the morning's events, my voice growing stronger as I spoke. The rangers exchanged knowing looks when I described the bear's size and the scar across its shoulder. Sounds like Old Tom, Mike said quietly. Old Tom. Sarah nodded, making notes. That's what we call him. He's been spotted in the area for years, but he's never attacked anyone before. Always kept his distance. We found his tracks, Mike added. Biggest black bear prints I've seen in 20 years of ranging. The blood trail told quite a story, both yours and his. That was quick thinking, hitting him in the nose with that branch. Their tracking dogs had refused to follow the bear's scent deeper into the forest, a detail that didn't surprise either ranger. Old Tom had that effect on hunting dogs, they explained. Something about him just wasn't quite right. We'll post warning signs at the trailheads, Sarah said, closing her notebook. But given the bear's history and the fact that you didn't provoke the attack, you're going to try to find him? I asked, surprised by the protective note in my voice. Despite everything, the thought of rangers hunting the bear bothered me. Mike shook his head. Territory's too vast, and he knows these mountains better than we do. The signs will stay up for a week or two, then come down once we're sure he's moved on. Standard procedure. A knock at the door interrupted us. A doctor entered, Dr. Martinez, according to her nameplate, carrying my chart. "How's our survivor doing?" she asked, checking my vitals. "The pain manageable?" I nodded, though manageable wasn't quite the word I'd choose. The doctor examined my bandaged leg, her expression professional but grim. "The cuts were deep," she explained. "We put in over 60 stitches. You'll have significant scarring, and there might be some lasting muscle damage. Physical therapy will help, but—" She paused. "You were lucky, a few inches deeper, or if help had arrived a few minutes later. When can I go home?" I interrupted, not wanting to hear the rest. "We'd like to keep you overnight for observation. Blood loss was severe, and there's risk of infection. But you should be able to leave tomorrow, provided someone can stay with you." "I'll call Sarah," Mike offered, then clarified at the doctor's questioning look. "Her sister, not me." I started to protest, but Sarah Collins cut me off. "Standard procedure after animal attacks. You'll need help for at least a few days, and it's better if it's family." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of forms and interviews. A local news station called the clinic, but the rangers intercepted the call. They were used to managing the media after wildlife encounters, keeping stories from becoming sensationalized. "Last thing we need is amateur bear hunters coming up here looking for old Tom," Mike explained, "or tourists hoping to spot him. Better to let it stay local." Sarah's final report was thorough but understated. A routine bear encounter that ended in minor injuries. No mention of the bear's unusual size or behavior. Nothing to draw attention or resources. Just another notation in the year's statistics. As evening approached, my sister arrived from Casper, her face tight with worry. The rangers briefed her on my care instructions while I dozed, the pain medication making everything soft around the edges. "I told you this would happen," she said later, sitting beside my bed. "Living alone up there." "Don't start," I murmured. "I'm not moving." She sighed but didn't argue. We both knew this conversation would resume once I was stronger. Through my hospital room window, I could see the mountains where old Tom roamed. Somewhere up there, a massive black bear with a scarred shoulder and bloodied nose was probably already becoming a legend among local hunters. But without clear photos or evidence beyond my injuries, he would remain just that. A story told around campfires, a warning to respect the wilderness. Mike stopped by one last time before his shift ended. "The warning signs are up," he reported. "But between you and me, they'll be down before the end of the month." Old Tom's never stayed in one area this long before. I thought about the bear's eyes in those final moments, that unnerving intelligence, that ancient wildness. "He'll move on," I said with certainty. He made his point. Mike studied me for a moment, then nodded. He understood. In bear country, sometimes you were reminded the hard way that we're guests here, not masters. The mountains had given me a warning, written in blood and sealed with scars I'd carry forever. The sun set behind the peaks, painting the sky in colors I'd seen 1,000 times from my cabin porch. Tomorrow I'd start healing. Tomorrow I'd begin figuring out how to live with what happened. But tonight, I let the pain medication pull me under, dreaming of dark shapes moving through autumn trees, and the sound of the wind sighing through branches like a mountain breathing. The fluorescent lights of the ranger station made my bandaged leg look even more garish than usual. I sat in Mike's office 3 days after the attack, watching him type up my official statement. My sister Sarah hovered nearby, still playing the role of protective caregiver despite my protests that I could manage. "Just one more time through the sequence," Mike said, his fingers pausing over the keyboard. "For the record." I shifted in the hard plastic chair, the movement sending a familiar throb through my injured leg. How detailed do you need it? Standard report format. Location, time, nature of encounter. He gestured at the form on his computer screen. We'll keep it simple. Simple. As if anything about that morning could be reduced to checkboxes and drop-down menus. I was gathering firewood near my cabin. I began, the words feeling mechanical after so many retellings. Approximately 1 mile northeast, near the fallen tree area, I encountered a large black bear, male, estimated weight. I paused, remembering the massive shape rising before me. Actually, I'm not sure about the weight. Mike nodded, typing. We'll put above average. No need to specify. I continued through the narrative, watching him sanitize my experience into bureaucratic language. Aggressive contact instead of terror. Defensive measures instead of desperate struggle. Sustained injuries instead of being torn open by ancient instincts wrapped in fur and muscle. And you're sure about the scar? He asked, looking up from the screen. On its shoulder? Yes. Old Tom, you called him. He saved the file with a few keystrokes. Officially, we're not identifying any specific bear in the report. Better for everyone that way. My phone buzzed again. Another news outlet trying to get a statement. I'd stopped answering unknown numbers after the first day, when a reporter had somehow gotten my contact information. The story had sparked interest beyond our local papers, drawing attention I neither wanted nor needed. You should return some of those calls, Sarah suggested, not for the first time. People should know what happened, what's still up there in those woods. I shook my head. And say what? That I was stupid enough to ignore every safety protocol we all learn up here? That I ran from a bear? You survived, Mike pointed out quietly. That's worth something. Because I got lucky. I gestured at my leg. This isn't a survival story. It's a reminder that we're not as in control as we like to think. The bandages needed changing again. I could feel the gauze growing damp. Dr. Martinez had warned me about this, about how the deep cuts would weep for days. Your body pushing out the memory, she'd said, trying to make it sound poetic instead of horrifying. Sarah helped me to the bathroom, where we went through the now familiar ritual of cleaning and rebandaging. The claw marks were healing, but slowly. 3 parallel gashes ran from mid-thigh to knee, the stitches making me look like a poorly mended rag doll. They'll scar, Sarah said softly, applying the antibiotic cream. But scars fade. Not these, I replied, watching her work. And that's okay. Back in Mike's office, he handed me a copy of the report to sign. The clinical language almost made me laugh. It could have been describing a fender bender instead of a life-altering encounter. The warning signs are coming down tomorrow, he mentioned, almost casually. No fresh tracks in the area. He's moved on like they usually do. I thought about my cabin, sitting empty while I recovered at Sarah's house in town. The windows I'd watched through as old Tom paced outside. The blood-stained floorboards we'd had to replace. I'm going back, I said, answering Sarah's unspoken question. Once the stitches are out. Jane, she started, but I cut her off. It's my home, and he won't come back. You can't know that. I do, though. I remembered those eyes, that final moment of recognition through my cabin window. We understand each other now. Mike cleared his throat. Still, maybe get your firewood delivered this winter, just to be safe. That startled a laugh out of me, pulling at the healing cuts. Already arranged, and I bought a better security light for the porch. Good girl, he said, standing to walk us out. At the door, he hesitated. You know, in 20 years of working these mountains, I've never seen anything quite like those tracks, or those claw marks on your leg. You saying you don't believe my story? I'm saying some things that happen in these mountains don't fit neatly in reports. Some things are just between you and the wilderness. Outside, the afternoon sun lit up the autumn colors that had seemed so beautiful that morning, before everything changed. My leg ached with each step down the ranger station's front walk, a permanent barometer I'd carry with me now. Dr. Martinez said the muscle damage would heal eventually, but I'd always have a slight limp in cold weather. The physical therapy exercises sat like a weight in my bag, printouts showing how to rebuild strength, how to adapt to my new limitations. But they were just paper. The real recovery would happen in my mind, in learning to live with the memory of that morning, in finding a way to love the mountains again without forgetting their power. Sarah's car waited in the parking lot, ready to take me back to her house in town. But my eyes drifted to the peaks rising behind the ranger station, to the dark line of trees where civilization faded into wilderness. Somewhere up there, old Tom was moving through his territory, carrying his own reminders of our encounter. The mountains didn't care about incident reports or warning signs or human intentions. They held their own justice, their own balance. I touched the bandages under my jeans, feeling the rough edges of the gauze. Some stories weren't meant for official records or news reports. Some stories were written in scars and memories, in the respect born of survival, in the understanding that came from looking into ancient eyes and seeing yourself reflected back. 3 months have passed since the attack, and winter has wrapped my cabin in a thick blanket of snow. I sit in my favorite chair by the fireplace, watching flames dance across store-bought logs, while my hand absently traces the scars through my jeans. The claw marks have healed into thick, rope lines that ache when storms approach, like now. The wind howls outside, and something heavy shifts on my porch. My breath catches for a moment before I recognize the sound, just snow falling from the roof. Still, I hold perfectly still, listening. These moments come less frequently now, but they never quite go away. My phone buzzes. A text from Mike. Fresh tracks near Thompson Ridge. Bigger than usual. Thought you should know. I don't need to ask what kind of tracks he means. Old Tom's prints have become something of a legend among the rangers, appearing after heavy snows only to vanish into the wilderness. They never lead toward populated areas anymore, just passing through, marking his territory in a way only those who know what to look for would recognize. The security light outside flickers on, catching movement. Through my window, I watch dark shapes move through the trees at dusk. Just deer, probably, or maybe elk coming down from the higher elevations to escape the storm. But I find myself studying their silhouettes, looking for one particular shape I both hope and fear to see. You're being ridiculous, I tell myself, but I still check that the doors are locked before returning to my chair. The fireplace crackles, reminding me of that morning's sounds. Branches breaking under massive paws, leaves crunching with each thundering step of pursuit. I close my eyes, and the memories flood back with crystalline clarity. The musky scent of wet fur, the hot breath on my neck, those intelligent eyes studying me through my cabin window. My leg throbs, a phantom echo of torn flesh and desperate survival. Dr. Martinez says the muscle damage is healing well, better than expected, but some wounds leave marks that go deeper than skin. I still do my physical therapy exercises every morning, working to strengthen what was weakened, to adapt to what was changed. The stack of firewood by my door is neatly split and delivered, a monthly service I now gladly pay for. The fallen tree area where it all began remains untouched, visible from my window like a reminder of nature's power. Sometimes I catch myself staring at that spot, remembering the moment when my understanding of these mountains shifted forever. A particularly strong gust of wind rattles my windows, and I jump despite myself. Sarah's voice echoes in my head from her last visit. You don't have to stay here, you know? No one would blame you for moving closer to town. But she doesn't understand. This isn't about stubbornness or pride anymore. It's about finding a way to live with what happened, to incorporate it into who I am now. The mountains didn't try to kill me that day. They simply reminded me of my place in their order. My phone buzzes again. This time it's a photo from Mike. A massive paw print in fresh snow, the ruler placed beside it for scale, making it look almost unreal. No message accompanies the image. None is needed. I limp to my window, pulled by something I can't quite name. The security light casts harsh shadows across the undisturbed snow of my yard. Beyond its reach, the forest is a wall of darkness broken only by falling snow. Each flake catches the light as it falls, creating a curtain between my world and what lies beyond. Movement catches my eye, something large and dark passing between trees at the edge of the light's reach. My heart pounds, but I don't move away from the window. The shape pauses, and for a moment, I swear I see the glint of eyes reflecting back at me. Then it's gone, leaving only swaying branches and falling snow. Was it him? Old Tom coming back to check his territory? Or just my mind playing tricks, creating shapes from shadows and memories? The mountains keep their secrets, and some questions aren't meant to have answers. I touch my leg again, feeling the raised lines through denim. These scars are my story now, written in flesh and bone. They ache with approaching storms, throb in the cold, remind me daily of what happened. But they're also my admission ticket to a deeper understanding of these mountains, earned in blood and terror and survival. The wind continues to howl, and somewhere in the vast darkness beyond my cabin, a massive black bear might be bedding down for the night, his own scars itching with remembered combat. Perhaps he dreams of that morning too, of the prey that fought back, of the encounter that left us both marked. I return to my chair, to the warmth of the fire and the illusion of safety it provides. My leg stretches out before me, the scars hidden but always present. Like the mountains themselves, they've become part of my landscape, something to respect, to learn from, to live with. Tomorrow I'll check the snow for tracks. Tomorrow I'll do my exercises and massage the stiff muscles and go about my life in these mountains. Tomorrow I'll continue learning how to balance respect with fear, caution with courage, memory with moving forward. But tonight, I listen to the wind and the crackling fire, to the sounds of the mountains breathing around me. And somewhere out there in the darkness, in the spaces between snowflakes and shadows, old Tom roams his territory, carrying the memory of our encounter like I carry these scars. A reminder that some stories write themselves in flesh and bone, in respect born of blood, in understanding earned through survival. We each walked away that morning with something that belonged to the other. I took with me a deeper understanding of these mountains and my place in them. And perhaps he took a reminder that not all prey is easy, that sometimes the hunt costs more than the meal is worth. Or maybe that's just the story I tell myself on cold winter nights, when the wind howls like a hungry bear and shadows move like memories through the falling snow.